Hi guys, and welcome to History That Makes You Sleepy Tonight. You arrive just a little too late. A thin layer of ash drifts slowly through the air, settling softly on your shoulders, light as snow but warmer than it should be. You brush it away without thinking, only to notice how quiet everything is. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the sound of wind. Just a stillness that feels unnatural. You take a slow breath, and there is a faint, bitter taste in the air. It lingers longer than expected. You pause, because something here does not quite make sense, and the more you notice, the clearer it becomes. If you were truly standing here, you would not have time to understand it. You probably would not survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, flow straight into the story. The ash vanishes as quietly as it appeared. The strange silence dissolves, and suddenly you find yourself somewhere very different. You stand beside a wagon on the vast plains of North America during the middle years of the 19th century. The air smells of grass, leather, wood smoke, and dust. Canvas covers ripple gently above the wagons. Oxen flick their tails. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries. A kettle rattles softly over a cooking fire. This is the Oregon Trail. Not the version from school books with simple arrows crossing a map. Not the version from old computer games where everyone somehow dies of dysentery before reaching the mountains. This is the real trail. And tonight, you are not traveling as a rugged explorer or famous guide. You are seeing the journey through the lives of children. The youngest travelers often had the hardest task of all. They had to endure months of uncertainty while possessing almost no control over where they went, what they ate, or where they slept. You watch a little girl no older than 8 sit on a wagon tongue while her mother folds blankets nearby. Her boots barely reach the ground. Dust clings to the hem of her dress. She looks ordinary. That is exactly what makes her remarkable. Thousands of ordinary children cross the continent this way. One widely accepted historical fact is that families made up a large portion of Oregon Trail emigrants. The trail was not only filled with adventurers, it was crowded with parents, grandparents, infants, and school-age children seeking new opportunities in the West. The evening sky glows orange. A chill begins creeping across the prairie. Adults notice it immediately. Children notice it eventually. That difference matters. When you're young, cold often arrives as an inconvenience before it becomes a danger. You can imagine the scene. The day may have been warm. Children may have spent hours walking beside wagons, collecting odd stones, chasing grasshoppers, or inventing games to break the monotony. Then the sun slips lower. The wind shifts. The temperature falls. And suddenly the world feels very different. You pull your coat tighter. A pioneer child might not have that luxury. Many families started the journey with limited supplies. Every item loaded into a wagon had to justify its weight. Extra blankets occupied valuable space. Additional clothing meant less room for food, tools, or seed. The prairie stretches endlessly around you. No hotels, no heated cabins, no glowing windows waiting in the distance. Just open land. Historians continue to discuss exactly how much hardship varied between wagon companies, because diaries reveal dramatically different experiences. Some families travelled with relative comfort, others faced shortages almost from the beginning. The uncertainty itself became part of daily life. You walk through camp as evening settles deeper. Children gather near fires. Some help prepare supper. Others sit quietly, exhausted after another long day. One boy carefully removes his shoes and studies a blister on his heel. Another pokes a stick into the fire and watches sparks float upward. Nobody knows exactly what tomorrow will bring. That includes the adults, which is perhaps the most unsettling part. Children usually depend upon adults for certainty. On the Oregon Trail, certainty was often unavailable. The wind strengthens. Canvas wagon covers snap softly. A mother wraps a shawl around a sleeping toddler. A father checks the oxen one final time. The routines repeat night after night. Simple actions become rituals of survival. There is an unusual detail from several emigrant accounts that often surprises modern readers. Some children reportedly collected buffalo chips during the day and proudly carried them back to camp, not because they enjoyed strange hobbies, because dried buffalo dung served as fuel. On treeless stretches of prairie, it burned surprisingly well. Modern children might complain about taking out the trash. Pioneer children sometimes gathered future campfires. History occasionally has a sense of humor. Darkness deepens. Stars emerge overhead. Without modern city lights, the sky appears astonishingly crowded. You look upward and see thousands of points of light. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like spilled silver dust. For many children, these stars became familiar companions. Night after night, they slept beneath the same sky. Night after night, they faced the same challenge. Staying warm. That challenge sounds simple. It was not. Cold has a peculiar way of changing everything. Food tastes different when you're cold. Sleep becomes difficult. Fear grows larger. Small discomforts become major problems. A blanket that feels adequate at sunset may feel terribly thin at midnight. A breeze that seems refreshing during the afternoon can become dangerous after dark. You notice adults glancing toward the horizon. Experienced travelers always respected weather. The plains possessed enormous power. A calm evening could become a miserable one surprisingly quickly. Children learn this lesson early, perhaps earlier than anyone wished. Another curious detail occasionally appears in emigrant journals. Some families created makeshift toys from scraps of cloth, carved wood, or discarded wagon materials during the journey. Even while crossing thousands of miles of wilderness, children still found ways to play. That ability to create joy from almost nothing may have been one of their greatest survival skills. Because survival is not only physical, it is emotional. The coldest nights tested more than fingers and toes. They tested patience, courage, optimism, family bonds. The camp gradually grows quieter. Conversations fade. The fires shrink lower. You hear the distant snort of an ox. A creaking wagon wheel shifts somewhere in the darkness. Then silence settles over the prairie. Not the unnatural silence from the beginning of our story. A different silence. A living silence. The kind that exists when hundreds of weary people finally surrender to sleep. You stand among them as the temperature continues dropping. The first truly cold night of the journey is approaching, and the children sleeping around you are about to discover that crossing the continent requires much more than simply following a trail westward. It requires learning how to endure the darkness between one day and the next. The lessons begin tonight. The camp sleeps beneath a sky crowded with stars, while the cold continues its slow, patient work. You remain beside the wagons as the night deepens. A canvas cover rustles softly. Somewhere, an ox shifts its weight and exhales a cloud of vapor into the darkness. Most of the children have finally fallen asleep, wrapped in blankets that never seem quite thick enough. Yet before these young travelers faced freezing nights on the trail, another challenge came first. Everything they owned had to fit into a wagon. You can picture the preparations months earlier. Back east, families spent weeks making difficult choices. A wagon looked large when standing empty in a yard. It looked much smaller after being loaded with food barrels, tools, cooking equipment, clothing, bedding, weapons, spare parts, and personal belongings. Every pound mattered. Every unnecessary item increased the burden on the animals. Many emigrants learned this lesson before even leaving home. A well-known historical reality is that travelers frequently abandoned possessions along the trail to lighten overloaded wagons. Diaries describe roadsides scattered with furniture, books, stoves, and countless items that had once seemed essential. You stand now in memory, months before the journey begins. A young boy watches as his parents sort household belongings. A chair stays behind. A table stays behind. A heavy chest stays behind. The boy probably assumes these things will somehow follow later. Children often trust that adults have a plan. Adults often hope they do. The family wagon waits nearby. Its white canvas cover glows in afternoon sunlight. It represents opportunity. It also represents sacrifice. For pioneer children, leaving home meant leaving familiar bedrooms, favourite hiding places, friends, schools, and routines. Even beloved possessions often disappeared from the packing list. A small doll might make the journey. A treasured book might survive the final sorting. Many other cherished objects did not. You watch a little girl quietly place a rag doll into a wooden box. The doll's dress is faded. One button eye sits slightly crooked. It may not look valuable. To her, it is priceless. Children throughout history have assigned enormous value to things adults might overlook. That truth remains remarkably consistent. The doll goes into the wagon. The oversized rocking horse does not. A curious detail from several emigrant accounts suggests that some children carried pet animals for portions of the journey. Puppies, kittens, and even small birds occasionally accompanied wagon trains. Though not always successfully, life on the trail was difficult enough for people. It was often even harder for pets. The morning of departure eventually arrives. You can almost hear the mixture of excitement and nervousness. Wheels creak, harness chains rattle, neighbours gather to watch. Some families expect they will never see one another again. In many cases, they are correct. The journey west is not a vacation. It is a migration. You climb onto the wagon seat beside the children. The road stretches toward the horizon. Dust rises behind the wheels. Home gradually disappears. The first days feel almost adventurous. Children are naturally curious. Everything seems new. Streams, prairies, wildflowers, strange birds, distant herds moving across the grasslands. For a while, the trip may even resemble a giant family outing. That illusion rarely lasts. The realities of trail life emerge quickly. The wagons move slowly. Walking becomes constant. Dust becomes unavoidable. Routine becomes repetitive. The novelty begins wearing thin. Yet even during these early stages, families pay close attention to clothing. Clothing is not merely about appearance. It is survival equipment. A number of researchers have debated exactly how much clothing children carried compared with adults. Because records vary considerably between families and economic backgrounds, what remains clear is that many children owned far fewer garments than modern people would consider normal. You examine a boy's outfit: a simple shirt, trousers held up by suspenders, a hat that has already seen better days, perhaps one extra set of clothing packed somewhere in the wagon. That may be the entire wardrobe. Laundry opportunities exist, of course. Convenience does not. The trail offers very little privacy and even less comfort. Imagine spending months wearing clothes that accumulate dust, smoke, sweat, mud, and rain. Modern washing machines suddenly seem rather magical. Children adapt because children often adapt to almost anything. That adaptability becomes one of their greatest strengths. As days pass, young travellers learn the rhythms of wagon life. Wake early, help with chores, walk, eat, walk more, make camp, sleep. Repeat. The routine sounds simple. It feels endless. You watch one family preparing supper near the end of a long day. A daughter gathers kindling. Her younger brother carries a water bucket with visible determination and questionable efficiency. Half the water disappears before reaching camp. He still receives praise. Sometimes effort matters more than results. The prairie glows gold beneath the setting sun. For a brief moment, everything feels peaceful. Children laugh. Parents relax. The journey seems manageable. Then evening arrives. Temperatures begin falling. The first hint of future hardship slips quietly into the air. Nobody panics. Nobody needs to. Not yet. Summer still dominates much of the trail season. The truly dangerous cold lies ahead. But preparation starts long before danger arrives. An interesting and slightly amusing trail tidbit appears in several recollections. Children occasionally competed over who could spot distant landmarks first. Rock formations, river crossings, mountain peaks, or unusual animals became subjects of enthusiastic debate. Human beings apparently invented road trip games long before automobiles existed. Some traditions never disappear. The sun finally drops below the horizon. Shadows stretch across camp. The wagons form a rough circle. Cooking fires flicker. You notice blankets being unpacked. They may not look important now. Soon they will become among the most valuable possessions any family owns. A mother carefully folds hers near the wagon. A father inspects canvas seams. Cold weather has not yet become a daily threat. But experienced travellers understand something crucial. Preparation delayed often becomes preparation denied. Many hardships on the Oregon Trail rewarded foresight. Waiting until a blizzard arrived was a poor time to discover a damaged blanket or leaking wagon cover. Children absorb these lessons gradually. Not through lectures, through experience. A loose shoe mattered after walking 10 miles. A missing coat mattered after sunset. An overlooked chore mattered when camp was delayed. The trail educated constantly. Its classroom stretched 2,000 miles. Its examinations arrived without warning. Night settles once more. You sit beside the fire while sparks drift upward toward the stars. Nearby, children begin arranging bedding for sleep. Some are tired enough to collapse immediately. Others stare into the flames, perhaps thinking about the homes they left behind, perhaps wondering what waits ahead, perhaps simply listening to the sounds of camp. The journey has barely begun. Yet already the trail is reshaping childhood itself. The road west demands patience. It demands resilience. And before long, it will demand something even harder. The ability to remain warm when the vast open plains decide to turn cold. For now, however, the wagons rest quietly beneath the stars, carrying not only supplies and hopes, but entire childhoods packed carefully into wooden wheels and canvas walls. Morning arrives gradually across the prairie. The darkness softens. Stars fade one by one. A pale ribbon of light appears along the eastern horizon. The camp begins waking before the sun itself appears. You hear quiet voices first, then the crackle of rekindled fires, then the familiar sounds of animals shaking off the night. Another day on the Oregon Trail is beginning. Children emerge from blankets slowly. Some sit rubbing sleepy eyes. Others spring awake with surprising energy, as though the hard ground beneath them were the most natural mattress in the world. Youth has certain advantages. A grown adult might spend the morning complaining about aching muscles. A child often recovers with remarkable speed. You stand among the wagons while breakfast preparations begin. The smell of coffee drifts through camp for the adults. Simple food cooks over small fires. Nothing fancy, nothing luxurious, just enough fuel for another long day of travel. The Oregon Trail has already started teaching its young travelers a lesson they will never forget. Life here moves according to necessity rather than preference. You cannot sleep late because the wagon train needs to move. You cannot remain beside a pleasant river because schedules matter. You cannot avoid bad weather simply because you dislike it. The trail does not negotiate. It simply continues west. A broadly accepted historical fact is that most wagon trains are tempted to start moving very early in the day, often shortly after sunrise, to maximize travel time and avoid the worst heat of afternoon. You watch as families prepare. Blankets are folded. Cooking equipment is packed. Animals are harnessed. Children help where they can. Not every task is completed perfectly. That is hardly surprising. A 10-year-old carrying supplies across uneven ground will occasionally drop something. The remarkable thing is how much responsibility many children accepted. Modern childhood often revolves around school schedules and organized activities and carefully supervised environments. Trail childhood looked very different. Here, even younger children contributed to daily survival. You begin walking beside a wagon as the train rolls forward. The wheels creak rhythmically. Dust rises behind them. Grass stretches endlessly in every direction. Hours pass, then more hours. The landscape seems almost unchanged. This is one of the great challenges of prairie travel. Distance behaves strangely. A hill visible in the morning may still seem distant by afternoon. A landmark on the horizon can take an entire day to reach. Children often struggled with this endlessness. Adults did too. The difference is that adults could at least pretend patience. children usually express their boredom more honestly. You notice a boy kicking a stone along the trail. After several minutes he loses interest. Then he begins counting birds. Later he walks backward for a while until his mother notices. Human creativity thrives when faced with monotony, particularly young human creativity. An unusual trail anecdote found in several journals describes children racing wagon wheels on foot and inventing elaborate imaginary adventures during long marches. The games varied, but the purpose remained the same. They help her to make the miles disappear, at least a little. You continue westward. The weather remains pleasant. The sun shines warmly overhead. It would be easy to assume the journey will always feel this manageable. Many emigrants probably thought exactly that during their early weeks on the trail. Then reality slowly introduced itself. Feet blistered. Supplies diminished. Equipment broke. Storms appeared. Illness arrived. The trail always revealed its difficulties eventually. For now, though, the children still find reasons to marvel. You spot a small group staring toward the distance. A herd of buffalo moves across the prairie. Thousands of dark shapes drift across the grass like a living river. The children watch in amazement. So do you. For travelers from eastern states, such sights could seem almost unbelievable. The continent still possessed enormous wild spaces, places where human settlements remained rare and nature dominated the horizon. The wagon train continues onward. Days blend together. Morning follows morning. Evening follows evening. The rhythm becomes familiar. Children begin recognizing patterns. They learn how long it takes to break camp. They learn which chores belong to them. They learn how clouds often signal approaching weather. Without realizing it, they are becoming experienced travelers. Some scholars continue debating how quickly children adapted psychologically to trail life, because personal accounts reveal dramatically different reactions. Some youngsters appeared resilient almost immediately. Others struggled with homesickness for months. Both responses are understandable. Imagine being separated from everything familiar while crossing a continent. Most adults would find that difficult. Children somehow managed it too. The afternoon sun slowly lowers. Heat lingers across the prairie. Sweat gathers beneath hats and collars. The journey remains demanding even before cold weather enters the picture. That is something modern people occasionally overlook. The Oregon Trail was exhausting in every season. Cold merely added another layer of difficulty. You walk beside a family whose youngest daughter has become fascinated by wildflowers. Every few minutes she stops to examine another bloom. Her parents gently encourage her to keep moving. The prairie seems infinite, yet children consistently find details adults miss. A bright butterfly, an unusual feather, a strangely shaped rock. Tiny discoveries transform enormous landscapes into something more personal. Perhaps that is one reason children often remembered the trail so vividly later in life. They noticed everything. As evening approaches once again, the wagon train begins searching for a suitable campsite. Location matters. Access to water matters. Grass for animals matters. Protection from weather matters. Good camps become small victories. Poor camps become long nights. The adults evaluate possibilities carefully. Children simply look forward to stopping. You cannot blame them. They have walked many miles today. Camp finally takes shape beside a shallow stream. Fires appear. Cooking begins. Voices rise and fall through the cooling air. The familiar routines repeat. Yet something subtle has changed. The breeze feels cooler than before. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice. Summer is still present, but its grip has weakened slightly. You feel it on your face as the sun disappears. The children notice it too. A few reach for extra layers. A mother adjusts a shawl. A father moves closer to the fire. Seasonal change rarely announces itself with fanfare. It arrives through small observations. A colder morning, a longer night, a sharper wind, one evening at a time. There is a charming detail mentioned in some emigrant recollections. Children occasionally treated campsites almost like temporary neighborhoods. Friendships formed quickly among youngsters traveling together. Games appeared after supper. Conversations continued until parents insisted upon sleep. For a few hours, The hardships of the journey faded. Children remained children. That simple truth may have been one of the most powerful forces keeping spirits alive. Darkness settles fully. The stars return. You recognize some of the same sounds from the previous night. Animals shifting, canvas rustling, firewood cracking softly. The trail feels familiar now, perhaps even comfortable. That feeling can be deceptive. Far ahead, beyond the endless grasslands, colder nights are waiting. The prairie has only begun revealing its challenges. For now, however, you lie beneath the vast western sky among families gradually learning what it means to live between one horizon and the next. And somewhere in the darkness, autumn is already making its slow approach. The cooler breeze from the previous evening lingers into morning. Not enough to alarm anyone, not enough to stop the wagons, just enough to make you notice. When you emerge from your blankets, the grass glitters faintly with moisture. The air carries a sharper edge than it did a few weeks ago. Your breath is not yet visible, but it feels as though it soon might be. Around camp, families begin their usual routine. Fires crackle. Coffee boils. Oxen wait patiently. Children rub sleep from their eyes and prepare for another day on the trail. The Oregon Trail teaches lessons gradually. Few arrive all at once. Cold weather is one of them. At first, it appears as a minor inconvenience. A chilly morning, a cool evening, a need for an extra blanket. Nothing dramatic. Then the days continue, the seasons advance, and little by little, everyone begins understanding that the continent ahead is far larger and harsher than they imagined. You walk beside the wagon train as sunlight spreads across the prairie. The landscape remains beautiful. Golden grasses sway in the wind. Cloud shadows drift across distant hills. The sky seems impossibly large, yet there is a new feeling in the air. Autumn is approaching. One established fact from trail records is that timing was considered absolutely critical for emigrants. Families aim to leave in spring and reach their destinations before winter snow-blocked mountain passes. That schedule governed nearly every decision. Travel too early and grass might not support the animals. Travel too late and winter could become deadly. The clock was always ticking. Children rarely thought in such strategic terms. Instead, they noticed simpler things. The mornings felt colder. The nights lasted longer. The water in wash basins felt unpleasantly icy. You watch a young boy splash his face beside a stream. The instant the cold water touches his skin, he jumps backward with an expression of complete betrayal. The stream has apparently violated an unspoken agreement. Nearby adults laugh. The boy does not, at least not immediately. Trail life offered plenty of opportunities for accidental comedy. As the day continues, conversations begin changing. Adults discuss weather more frequently. Clouds attract attention. Wind direction matters. The appearance of distant mountains becomes encouraging and unsettling at the same time. Mountains mean progress. They also mean colder temperatures. You notice parents inspecting clothing more carefully. Coats emerge from storage. Scarves reappear. Blankets are checked for damage. Preparation becomes increasingly important. Children often respond differently. Many remain wonderfully unconcerned. A cool breeze means an opportunity to run faster. A frosty morning means seeing your breath. What adults sees as a warning, a child sometimes sees as entertainment. That innocence can be charming. It can also be inconvenient. You watch several youngsters playing beside camp after supper. The air grows steadily colder. Parents repeatedly suggest additional layers. The children repeatedly ignore the advice. Certain aspects of childhood remain remarkably consistent across centuries. An interesting detail occasionally found in emigrant recollections describes children using frost patterns as entertainment. Some traced shapes with their fingers on wagon surfaces or admired intricate ice formations that appeared overnight. Even cold weather could become a source of wonder. That ability to discover fascination almost anywhere may have helped many children endure difficult circumstances. The wagon train continues west. Day after day, week after week, the landscape slowly changes. You begin noticing fewer signs of summer. Grass appears less vibrant. Evening shadows arrive sooner. The prairie acquires a more serious character. One evening, you sit beside a campfire while families eat supper. The flames feel especially pleasant tonight, not because the fire is larger, because the air is cooler. The difference matters. A fire that once served mainly for cooking now provides genuine comfort. Children gather closer to its warmth. Parents do the same. The transformation happens almost without anyone mentioning it. A number of historians have examined whether emigrant families fully understood the weather risks ahead, and the evidence remains mixed. Some travellers prepared extensively and knew exactly what challenges to expect. Others appear to have underestimated the severity of Western winters. Knowledge did not always equal protection. Even well-prepared families faced enormous uncertainty. You stare into the dancing flames. The smell of wood smoke drifts upward. Sparks vanish into the darkness. Around you, conversations grow quieter. People are tired. The trail demands energy every single day. There are no weekends, no holidays, no opportunities to pause for long. The wagons keep moving. Children keep adapting. And adaptation becomes increasingly important. You notice a little girl helping her mother arrange bedding inside a wagon. The process looks simple. It is not. Sleeping comfortably on the trail requires creativity. Blankets must be positioned carefully. Available space must be used efficiently. Every family develops its own methods. The younger children often receive the warmest positions. Not necessarily because parents love them more, because smaller bodies lose heat faster. Practicality and affection frequently overlap. The evening grows colder still. You pull your coat tighter. For the first time, the possibility of genuinely cold nights feels real. Not future cold, not mountain cold, present cold. Manageable for now, noticeable all the same. A curious observation appears in several personal accounts from the trail. Some children reportedly preferred sleeping beneath the wagons during pleasant weather, rather than inside crowded spaces. The arrangement provided fresh air and a sense of adventure, though parents naturally worried about safety. To a child, a wagon could become a castle, a fort, a secret clubhouse, or a temporary bedroom. Imagination remained one of the few resources that never ran short. The stars emerge overhead once again. You have seen them many nights now, yet they never lose their beauty. Without electric lights, the heavens appear astonishingly vivid. Children often fell asleep beneath skies more spectacular than most modern people ever witness. It is one of the strange contradictions of the Oregon Trail. The hardships were immense. The beauty could be equally immense. The same journey that delivered exhaustion also delivered wonder. The same prairie that exposed travelers to danger offered breathtaking sunsets. The same cold wind that chilled fingers carried the scent of endless open spaces. Life rarely presents itself in simple categories. The trail certainly did not. Tonight, however, the cold feels more noticeable than the beauty. You see it in the way families gather closer together. You hear it in the crackling fires that burn a little longer. You feel it in the air itself. Autumn is no longer approaching. It has arrived. The children may not fully understand what that means yet. They still laugh. They still play. They still find amusement in small discoveries along the road. But the season is quietly changing the rules. Each colder night becomes a lesson. Each frosty morning becomes a warning. And somewhere ahead, beyond the rolling prairie and distant horizon, the truly freezing nights are waiting. For now, the wagon train sleeps beneath a sky bright with stars, while the first serious chill of the journey settles gently across the grasslands. The cold has introduced itself. Soon, it will demand much more attention. The first serious chill lingers through the night and into the following evening. By now, the routine of trail life feels almost familiar. Wake, travel, stop, build camp, sleep, repeat. The pattern has become so steady that even the youngest children often know what comes next before adults say a word. Yet familiar does not mean easy. If anything, the daily repetition makes small comforts more important. And among all the comforts available on the Oregon Trail, few mattered more than the evening campfire. As the wagon train slows near sunset, you can almost feel everyone's mood improve. Children who spent hours walking straighten with renewed energy. Parents scan the landscape for a suitable place to stop. Animals seem relieved as well. Another long day is finally ending. The prairie glows beneath fading sunlight. Shadows stretch across the grass. The temperature is already beginning its nightly descent. Camp must be built quickly. A common fact recorded throughout emigrant journals is that establishing camp became a highly practiced routine. Experienced families could unpack essential supplies, prepare meals, tend animals, and arrange sleeping areas with impressive efficiency. Practice creates speed. Speed creates comfort. Comfort can create survival. You watch the process unfold around you. Oxen are unhitched. Water is collected. Cooking equipment emerges from wagons. Children immediately receive instructions. Some gather fuel, some fetch water. Others help organize bedding. Nobody simply sits around waiting. Even younger travelers contribute in small ways. The camp gradually transforms from a cluster of wagons into a temporary community. Smoke rises into the cooling air. Voices mingle. Fires appear one after another like glowing stars scattered across the prairie. The sight is surprisingly beautiful. The warmth is even better. You kneel beside one of the fires. The heat reaches your face instantly. It feels wonderful after a long day outdoors. Children drift closer as supper cooks. Some sit cross-legged. Others stretch tired legs toward the flames. Nobody needs to explain why. The fire provides more than warmth. It provides reassurance. Darkness feels less intimidating when light flickers nearby. The Oregon Trail offered very little certainty. A campfire became a small circle of predictability in an unpredictable world. The smell of supper spreads through camp. Perhaps beans. Perhaps bacon. Perhaps bread cooked in a simple skillet. Nobody would mistake the meal for fine dining. After hours of travel, however, almost any hot food feels satisfying. You watch a young boy scrape the last crumbs from his tin plate with complete concentration. There is something oddly timeless about hungry children. Centuries change. Technology changes. The enthusiasm for supper remains remarkably constant. As night deepens, the campfire takes on a new role. Now it becomes a defense against cold. The flames crackle and pop. Sparks drift upward into darkness. Children edge closer. Parents occasionally remind them not to get too close. The warnings are repeated so often they begin sounding ceremonial. One amusing detail preserved in several pioneer recollections involves children attempting to roast almost anything edible over campfires. Potatoes, bits of dough, and occasionally questionable experiments found their way into the coals. Results varied considerably. Young inventors rarely let practicality limit ambition. You smile as a group of children gathers near one fire. The adults are talking nearby. The youngsters have formed their own small society. Stories pass between them. Rumours spread. Exaggerations grow larger with every retelling. Perhaps someone claims to have seen a giant snake. Perhaps someone insists a distant hill resembled a castle. Perhaps both stories become dramatically less accurate as the evening progresses. Children remain gifted storytellers, especially when facts are optional. The wind strengthens slightly. Immediately, everyone notices. The prairie has a way of reminding travellers how exposed they really are. There are no permanent walls here. No sturdy houses. No guaranteed shelter. Only wagons, blankets, canvas. And whatever preparations families have managed to create, you glance toward the darkness beyond the fires. The land seems endless. Black waves of grass stretch beyond visibility. The camp suddenly feels very small. Perhaps that is why people naturally gather closer together. Human beings are social creatures. Cold weather tends to reinforce that fact. Families sit shoulder to shoulder. Friends share conversations. Children lean against parents. Warmth becomes collective. Not just physical warmth, emotional warmth as well. Researchers continue discussing how much communal support influenced emigrant survival and morale. But many personal accounts emphasize cooperation as one of the journey's most valuable resources. No family truly traveled alone. not emotionally, not practically, certainly not during difficult weather. The firelight dances across faces. You watch expressions soften as exhaustion gradually replaces activity. Children begin yawning. Conversations become quieter. The day's energy is fading, yet bedtime itself remains a process. Sleeping arrangements require preparation. Blankets must be organized. Clothing adjusted. Space negotiated. Imagine several people attempting to sleep comfortably inside a wagon designed primarily for cargo. Comfort requires creativity. Children often became experts at fitting into surprisingly small spaces. Adults had less flexibility, literally and figuratively. A curious observation appears in some diary entries from the trail. Several parents noted that younger children often seemed less bothered by crowded sleeping conditions than adults. A child might happily curl up in a corner and fall asleep within minutes. Meanwhile, nearby adults remained awake, contemplating every uncomfortable surface imaginable. Youth occasionally possesses enviable talents. The fire burns lower. Someone adds another log. The flames brighten briefly. Faces glow orange and gold. The night air continues cooling. You can feel it now whenever you step away from the heat. The contrast grows stronger. Near the fire, comfort. Away from it, cold. The difference feels increasingly significant. A little girl wraps herself in a blanket and studies the sparks rising into the darkness. For a moment she appears mesmerized. You understand why. There is something hypnotic about watching fire at night. Perhaps people thousands of years ago felt exactly the same. Perhaps future generations will too. Some experiences seem permanently woven into human nature. Eventually parents begin guiding children toward bed. A few youngsters protest. Most are too tired. The long miles of the trail settle heavily upon them. One by one they disappear into wagons, beneath blankets, or beside family members. The camp grows quieter. The fires continue burning, not only for warmth, for security, for light, for comfort, for the simple reassurance that darkness has not entirely taken over the world. You remain beside the fading glow. The stars shine brilliantly overhead. The prairie wind whispers across the grass. Nearby children drift into sleep carrying memories of stories, laughter, and firelight. Those memories matter, because before long, the nights ahead will become colder still. And when genuine hardship arrives, the warmth of campfires will become more precious than ever. For now, however, the flames hold back the darkness. Families rest. The wagons stand silent. And the cold waits patiently beyond the circle of light. The fire eventually fades into glowing embers. The conversations disappear. The prairie settles into silence. And now comes the part of trail life that sounds simple when written in a diary but feels considerably more complicated when experienced firsthand. Sleeping. You might imagine sleep arriving easily after a day spent walking across endless miles of prairie. Sometimes it did. Often it did not. The cold had a habit of interfering with even the most exhausted traveller. Tonight you discover how pioneer children survived those increasingly chilly nights. Not through comfort. Comfort is in very short supply. They survived through improvisation. You lie beside a wagon as darkness deepens overhead. The stars seem close enough to touch. The air grows colder minute by minute. Nearby families begin settling into their sleeping arrangements. No two appear exactly alike. Every family develops its own system. Every available blanket becomes valuable. Every bit of warmth matters. A frequently noted reality of trail life was that bedding occupied a surprisingly important portion of the wagon space. Blankets, quilts, and sleeping materials ranked among the most essential possessions families carried west. Food kept you alive during the day. Bedding helped keep you alive during the night. The distinction mattered. You watch one mother carefully arranging blankets inside her wagon. She moves with the efficiency of someone who has repeated the task dozens of times already. The youngest child is placed between older siblings. Another blanket is layered over everyone. A final quilt is tucked carefully around the edges. The arrangement resembles a human puzzle. Every gap where cold air might enter receives attention. Children often slept close together for a simple reason. People generate heat. A family sharing warmth could remain far more comfortable than individuals sleeping separately. Modern central heating accomplishes this task invisibly. On the Oregon Trail, the solution was considerably more personal. You notice another family spreading bedding directly beneath their wagon. The night is dry. The weather seems stable. The wagon itself provides limited protection from dew and wind. It is not perfect. Then again, perfection rarely visits the Oregon Trail. The children seem pleased with the arrangement. Sleeping outdoors still feels like an adventure. At least for now, a fascinating little detail occasionally appears in emigrant memories. Some children gave names to particularly treasured blankets or quilts. These items became companions of a sort, familiar sources of comfort carried across thousands of miles. That may sound unusual. Then again, people often become attached to objects that accompany them through difficult experiences. The blanket becomes more than fabric. It becomes familiarity itself. The temperature continues falling. You can feel it on your face. The warmth of the fire no longer reaches this far. Now blankets must do the work alone. Fortunately, many pioneer families owned quilts. These were not decorative objects displayed for admiration. They were practical tools. Heavy, warm, extremely valuable. Many had been made by hand. Each stitch represented labor. Each quilt represented preparation. As you settle beneath one, you immediately understand its importance. The cold still exists, but it feels more distant, manageable, contained, at least temporarily. The prairie wind whispers through the darkness. Canvas wagon covers rustle softly. An ox coughs somewhere nearby. These sounds become part of the nighttime landscape. Children gradually learn to sleep through them. Human beings are remarkably adaptable, particularly young human beings. You glance upward. The stars remain brilliant. Without clouds, heat escapes easily into the atmosphere. Beautiful nights often become cold nights. The sky offers beauty and discomfort simultaneously. The Oregon Trail excelled at such combinations. A number of scholars continue examining how different economic backgrounds affected emigrant comfort on the trail. Wealthier families sometimes possess better bedding and supplies, though even substantial resources could not eliminate the challenges posed by weather and geography. Money helped. Nature still made the final decisions. You notice a little boy shifting beneath his blankets. For a moment he seems uncomfortable. Then his older sister pulls part of her quilt over his shoulder. The movement is small, almost invisible, yet it captures something important. Many children survived difficult conditions because families worked together. The trail constantly rewarded cooperation. The strongest individual could still struggle alone. A supportive family provided advantages impossible to measure precisely. The hours pass. The cold reaches its lowest point sometime after midnight. This is when the challenge becomes most serious. Campfires have mostly burned down. Darkness covers the prairie completely. The ground itself seems to radiate cold upward. You pull your blanket tighter. So does everyone else. Children sleeping peacefully now often did so because parents spent considerable effort arranging bedding properly before nightfall. Good preparation frequently looked invisible by morning. That did not make it less important. There is another detail worth noticing. Many emigrant children wore portions of their clothing while sleeping. Modern pajamas were not always practical under trail conditions. Additional layers meant additional warmth. Warmth meant better rest. Better rest meant greater strength for tomorrow. Everything connected to everything else. Trail life rarely allowed isolated decisions. A clever choice tonight might make tomorrow easier. A careless choice might do the opposite. You hear a mother quietly checking on her children. A blanket is adjusted. A coat is tucked closer. Then silence returns. Parents on the Oregon Trail carried enormous responsibilities. They could not eliminate danger. They could only reduce it. Sometimes that meant standing watch during storms. Sometimes it meant sacrificing personal comfort. Sometimes it meant spending half the night ensuring children remained warm enough to sleep. The stars slowly wheel overhead. The night feels endless, yet eventually a faint grey light appears on the horizon. Dawn approaches. You survived another cold night. The children around you survived it too. Not because conditions were easy, because they learned to adapt, because families prepared carefully, because blankets, quilts, and shared warmth formed a surprisingly effective defense against the prairie cold. One amusing recollection from a former trail child describes waking up so tightly wrapped in bedding that climbing out felt like escaping from a cocoon. The memory remained vivid decades later. Human beings tend to remember discomfort. They also remember absurdity. The Oregon Trail provided plenty of both. The first hints of sunrise spread across the grasslands. Camp begins stirring. Blankets are folded. Children emerge, blinking into the morning light. Some complain about the cold, others seem entirely unbothered. Both reactions are perfectly normal. The night has left its mark, yet everyone is still moving west. That is what matters. The journey continues. The weather continues changing. And far ahead, beyond the horizon, conditions are preparing to become far more demanding than a merely chilly night beneath a quilt. For now, however, the wagons stand quietly in the dawn light while families gather their bedding and prepare once again to follow the long road toward Oregon. The cold morning fades into another day of travel. Blankets have been folded. Wagons are moving again. Children who spent the night wrapped tightly inside quilts now walk beside creaking wheels beneath a bright sky. For a few hours, it almost feels as though winter's approach has been exaggerated. The sun shines warmly. The grasslands stretch peacefully toward the horizon. Birds drift overhead. The world appears calm. That appearance, as many trail families eventually learned, can be misleading. Weather on the Great Plains possesses a talent for changing moods quickly. You walk alongside the wagon train while the day unfolds. At first, nothing seems unusual. The sky remains clear. The air feels comfortable. Yet experienced travellers have begun watching the horizon more carefully. They know that conditions can transform with surprising speed. The prairie offers very few barriers. Nothing blocks approaching winds. Nothing slows distant storms. What forms far away often arrives sooner than expected. A well-documented reality of the Oregon Trail is that emigrants regularly encountered severe weather, including thunderstorms, hailstorms, high winds, and early snowfalls depending on location and season. Nature rarely consulted travel schedules. You notice dark clouds gathering far in the distance. At first they resemble harmless smudges against the sky. Hours later they appear larger, more defined, more serious. Adults exchange glances. Children continue playing games beside the wagons. The difference between experience and youth becomes visible. One sees warning signs. The other sees interesting clouds. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. A young girl points toward the sky and announces that the clouds resemble a giant rabbit. A few minutes later, another child insists they look more like a buffalo. The debate becomes surprisingly passionate. Meanwhile, the clouds continue growing. The prairie wind strengthens. Grass bends in rippling waves. Dust rises from the trail. You feel the change immediately. The air no longer feels gentle. It feels restless, as though something is preparing to happen. Families begin making quiet adjustments. Loose items are secured. Clothing is checked. Wagon covers receive inspection. Nobody panics. There is no need. Preparation works best before emergencies arrive. You notice a father tightening ropes along the side of a wagon. His children watch with curiosity. Perhaps they do not yet understand why. Perhaps they will soon. An intriguing observation preserved in several emigrant accounts mentions children becoming amateur weather experts simply through constant exposure. Many learn to identify storm clouds, wind shifts, and changing conditions far earlier than modern children typically would. The trail itself became their classroom. Lessons arrived daily, often without warning. The afternoon progresses. The clouds continue advancing. Now even the children recognize that something has changed. Sunlight dims, shadows soften. The sky loses its cheerful appearance. The prairie suddenly feels larger and less welcoming. You can almost sense the collective mood shifting throughout the wagon train. Conversations become shorter. Attention focuses outward. The weather has everyone's interest now, and then the first cold gust arrives. It sweeps across the grasslands with startling force. Canvas snaps sharply. Has to require immediate attention. Dust spins through the air. Children blink against the wind. The temperature drops noticeably, not dramatically. Not yet, but enough to make people reach for extra layers. This is how many weather challenges begin. Not with disaster. With hints, with warnings, with subtle changes that invite preparation. The wagon train continues moving. Stopping immediately is not always practical. Travellers must balance caution with necessity. Eventually, however, the approaching weather becomes impossible to ignore. The dark clouds now dominate much of the horizon. The wind whistles steadily. The prairie has lost its peaceful character. You feel as though you're standing before a giant curtain slowly descending across the landscape. Some historians continue examining how emigrants interpreted weather threats in unfamiliar regions. Travellers often arrive from environments very different from the Great Plains, and many had to learn local weather patterns through direct experience. Experience can be an excellent teacher. It can also be a demanding one. The first scattered drops of rain arrive. Children react immediately. Some laugh. Some groan. Some attempt to avoid the impossible task of getting wet outdoors. Parents focus on practical matters. Where to stop. How quickly to establish camp. How to protect supplies. The wagon train gradually prepares for another evening. This one feels different. The weather has changed the atmosphere entirely. There is less laughter, more urgency, more attention, more caution. You help gather supplies while the wind continues strengthening. The camp forms more quickly than usual. People move efficiently. Nobody wants to be caught unprepared. By sunset, the storm has not fully arrived. Instead, it hovers nearby like an unwelcome guest lingering outside the door. The sky remains heavy with clouds. The air feels damp. The temperature continues falling. Children huddle closer to fires than they did only a few days ago. The difference is noticeable. Comfort is no longer the only goal. Warmth is becoming increasingly important. A memorable trail anecdote tells of children attempting to predict weather by observing animal behaviour. Whether accurate or not, theories involving birds, livestock, and wildlife circulated enthusiastically among young travellers. Human beings have always enjoyed pretending to possess secret knowledge. Children are particularly enthusiastic participants. The evening meal proceeds beneath threatening skies. The food tastes comforting. The fire feels wonderful. Yet nobody completely relaxes. The weather remains part of every conversation. Every glance toward the horizon, every gust of wind. You notice a little boy staring into the darkness beyond camp. When asked what he's looking for, he simply replies that he wants to see the storm before it sees him. The logic may be questionable. The determination is admirable. Night finally settles across the prairie. Clouds obscure many of the stars. That alone feels strange. After so many clear nights, the darkness seems heavier. Closer! The wind continues whispering through the grass. Occasionally it rises into a low howl. Families retreat beneath wagon covers and blankets. Children settle into sleeping places. Yet sleep comes less easily tonight. Storms possess a way of creating anticipation. You find yourself listening, waiting, wondering. The first distant rumble arrives long after darkness has taken hold. Not close, not immediate, just a low sound rolling across the prairie. Thunder. The children hear it too. Some pull blankets closer. Others listen with fascination. Tomorrow may bring rain, perhaps stronger winds, perhaps even the season's first snowflakes in certain regions. Nobody knows for certain. That uncertainty is part of trail life. The weather never signs contracts. It never makes promises. It simply arrives. And as you lie awake beneath the canvas and quilts, listening to distant thunder beyond the horizon, you begin to understand that the cold nights ahead will not arrive alone. They will arrive accompanied by storms. The distant thunder does not disappear. It lingers through the night like a reminder, a warning whispered from beyond the horizon. By dawn the storm itself has mostly moved elsewhere, but cooler air remains behind. The prairie feels different now, less forgiving, less predictable. You step from your blankets and immediately notice the change. Your breath hangs briefly in the morning air. Not for long, just long enough. Children see it too. Several instantly begin exhaling exaggerated clouds and competing to produce the largest one. Humanity has apparently been entertaining itself with visible breath for a very long time. The adults are less amused. They understand what the colder air means. Autumn is advancing. The nights ahead will become increasingly challenging. The wagon train resumes its journey. Wheels roll. Oxen lean into their harnesses. Dust mixes with cooler winds. The trail stretches endlessly westward. As the day passes, you find yourself thinking more about the coming night than the coming miles, because tonight you will experience one of the most important shelters available to pioneer children. The wagon itself, a commonly accepted historical observation, is that covered wagons were primarily designed for transporting supplies, rather than serving as comfortable living spaces. Despite popular imagination, they were often crowded, cramped, and surprisingly uncomfortable. Yet when temperatures dropped, they became valuable refuges. Not luxurious, valuable. The distinction matters. Evening eventually arrives. The camp forms beside a small stream bordered by scattered brush. Families move through familiar routines. Fires appear, meals are prepared, animals are tended. The air grows steadily colder. You notice people reaching for coats earlier than usual. The season is changing one evening at a time. By the time darkness settles fully, the temperature has dropped enough that nobody lingers far from the fires. Children gather close to the warmth. Faces glow orange in the flickering light. Stories drift between campsites. Laughter appears occasionally, but the cold remains part of every moment. Eventually bedtime arrives. Now comes the nightly challenge. Where exactly do you sleep? You climb into one of the wagons. Immediately you understand the limitations. The space feels smaller than expected. Much smaller. Supplies occupy valuable room. Boxes sit beneath blankets. Personal belongings fill corners. Every available inch serves a purpose. Sleeping inside requires careful organization. You settle among quilts and bedding. Nearby children do the same. Some families arrange sleeping positions with remarkable precision. The youngest children often receive the warmest locations. Older siblings fit wherever space remains. Parents make do with whatever positions are available. Comfort becomes negotiable. Warmth does not. The wagon offers several advantages. It blocks wind. It creates a smaller space that retains heat more effectively. It provides a sense of enclosure absent from sleeping directly beneath the stars. Most importantly, it allows families to remain close together. That closeness matters. Body heat becomes part of the survival strategy. The arrangement might sound crowded, because it is. Very crowded. You lie shoulder to shoulder with others. Movement becomes a carefully managed activity. Turning over may require cooperation. Everyone learns quickly. A charming detail preserved in some pioneer memories describes children inventing secret sleeping territories inside wagons. Small corners acquired names, imaginary ownership, and occasionally fierce disputes. Even cramped conditions could inspire creativity. Children rarely stop being children simply because circumstances become difficult. Outside, the wind brushes against the canvas cover. The sound is soft, rhythmic, almost soothing. For a moment, the wagon feels surprisingly secure, like a tiny wooden island floating across an enormous sea of grass. The darkness beyond the canvas seems distant, contained. You understand why many children preferred sleeping inside despite the lack of space. The wagon creates the illusion of a room, a temporary room, a moving room, but still a room. Researchers continue exploring how children perceived safety on the trail compared with adults. Personal recollection suggests that youngsters often found comfort in familiar routines and family presence, even when objective dangers remained significant. Children sometimes judge security differently than grown-ups. If family is nearby, the world feels manageable. That principle appears repeatedly throughout trail accounts. The hours pass. The wagon creaks occasionally as temperatures continue falling. Wood contracts, canvas shifts. These sounds become familiar. Soon they blend into the background. A child nearby snores softly. Another murmurs something unintelligible while dreaming. The long miles of the trail eventually claim everyone. Exhaustion remains one of the most effective sleep aids ever invented. You stare upward. The curved canvas roof hangs only a short distance above your face. There is no room for grand architectural beauty here. No towering ceilings, no elegant furnishings, just practical shelter. And tonight, practical shelter is enough. Outside, the cold continues strengthening. The difference between sleeping inside and outside the wagon becomes increasingly noticeable. You feel chilly, but not freezing. Protected. Not comfortable exactly. Protected. That word captures the experience more accurately. Somewhere during the night, you wake briefly. The air feels colder than before. You pull the blanket tighter. So does everyone else. The wagon has retained some warmth generated by its occupants. Not a great amount. Enough. Sometimes enough is all a person requires. There is a curious story found in one emigrant recollection involving a child who insisted on bringing a favourite pillow, despite repeated objections about wagon space. The pillow survived the entire journey and became something of a family legend. Practical, perhaps not. Understandable, absolutely. People cling to familiar comforts when surrounded by uncertainty. The Oregon Trail offered plenty of uncertainty. Eventually you drift back to sleep. The wagon rocks slightly in the wind. The sound of canvas rustling becomes strangely comforting. You almost forget how exposed the camp really is. Almost. Then another gust arrives. The wagon shudders gently. The reminder returns. You are still on the open prairie, still hundreds of miles from your destination, still vulnerable to weather, distance, and circumstance. The wagon merely softens those realities. It does not erase them. Slowly dawn approaches. The eastern sky brightens beyond the canvas. Children begin stirring. Blankets shift. Yawns spread through the cramped space. Another cold night has passed. The wagon did its job. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but effectively. You climb outside and breathe the crisp morning air. The grass sparkles with frost. The world looks beautiful and noticeably colder than yesterday. The prairie is preparing for winter. The children are learning how to adapt. One night inside a wagon at a time. The frost glittering across the grass does not last long. Morning sunlight gradually melts it away. Tiny crystals vanish from leaves and wagon wheels. Before noon arrives, much of the prairie looks warm again. That is one of the deceptive qualities of frontier weather. A cold dawn can be followed by a pleasant afternoon. A comfortable afternoon can be followed by a freezing night. The constant change keeps everyone paying attention, especially the adults. The children still find reasons to enjoy the day. They always seem to. You walk beside the wagon train as it moves steadily westward. The landscape rolls endlessly ahead. Grass bends beneath the wind. Clouds drift across a pale blue sky. Everything appears peaceful. Yet a new concern is beginning to occupy the minds of many travellers. Fuel, specifically the lack of it. You might assume staying warm simply requires building larger fires. The problem is obtaining something to burn. Large portions of the Great Plains contain surprisingly few trees. For families accustomed to wooded regions, this reality often came as an unwelcome surprise. A widely recognized fact about travel across the plains is that emigrants frequently encountered long stretches where firewood was scarce or entirely absent, forcing them to seek alternative fuel sources. The alternatives were not always glamorous. You probably remember the buffalo chips mentioned earlier. Those dried remnants left behind by immense buffalo herds suddenly become much more important. Children often help collect them, not because the task is exciting, because the campfire depends upon it. You watch several youngsters carrying small bundles back toward camp during a midday stop. Nobody appears thrilled. Nobody refuses either. The trail has a way of transforming ordinary chores into necessities. Fuel means warmth. Warmth means comfort. Sometimes warmth means survival. The connection is easy to understand. As the day continues, the wind grows stronger. Not storm strength, just persistent, steady, the sort of wind that never seems to stop entirely. You feel it against your face hour after hour. Children feel it too. By evening, everyone is slightly more tired than usual. Constant wind has that effect. The wagon train eventually reaches another campsite. Families begin the familiar process of setting up for the night. Only this evening brings a challenge. Fuel supplies are limited. The fires that appear across camp are smaller than usual. Immediately, you notice the difference. The flames provide less heat. People gather closer. Conversations occur within tighter circles. Nobody wastes warmth. One particularly interesting observation found in several emigrant journals notes that children quickly learned the value of fuel. Youngsters who might have ignored scattered sticks at home became surprisingly skilled at spotting anything that could burn. Necessity tends to sharpen attention. A twisted branch, a piece of driftwood, a cluster of dried brush. Everything becomes useful. The evening meal cooks over modest fires. The smell of smoke drifts through camp. The flames flicker bravely against the growing darkness. You sit nearby, stretching your hands toward the warmth. It feels good. Yet you cannot help noticing how quickly the heat fades once you move away. The cold feels stronger tonight. Not dramatically stronger, noticeably stronger. The season continues advancing. A father carefully conserves fuel by adding small amounts at a time. A mother keeps children close to the fire's warmth while supper cooks. Every family develops strategies. Some strategies work better than others. All of them reflect the same reality. Resources are limited. The prairie does not provide endless conveniences. You glance across the camp. The fires resemble tiny islands of light floating in a sea of darkness. The sight is beautiful and slightly unsettling. Beyond those circles of light lies an immense landscape that does not particularly care whether travellers are warm or cold. Nature is not cruel, it is simply indifferent. There is a difference. Some researchers continue exploring how frequently fuel shortages affected emigrant camps, since conditions varied greatly depending on location, season, and available resources. Certain groups enjoyed relatively easy access to wood. Others spent considerable effort finding enough material to burn. Luck often played a role. So did timing. So did geography. Many aspects of the Oregon Trail depended upon factors beyond human control. Children gradually begin settling near the fires. Some hold tin cups filled with hot drinks. Others simply stare into the flames. There is something calming about firelight. Something ancient. Perhaps people sitting beside fires thousands of years ago felt exactly the same sense of comfort. The crackling sound, the dancing light, the gentle warmth. Certain experiences seem to connect generations across centuries. You watch a little girl extending her hands toward the flames. The orange light reflects in her eyes. Behind her, the prairie disappears into darkness. The contrast feels dramatic. Warmth and cold, light and shadow, safety and uncertainty. Every campfire creates its own tiny world. An amusing trail recollection tells of children occasionally arguing about whose collected fuel contributed most to the evening fire. The debates reportedly became surprisingly competitive, despite the fact that everyone benefited from the same flames. Human beings seem capable of turning nearly any activity into a contest, especially young human beings. The fire burns lower as the evening progresses. This creates another challenge. Families must decide how much fuel to save for later and how much to use now. Burn everything early, and the night becomes long and cold. Conserve too much and comfort suffers immediately. The balance requires judgment. Adults carry that responsibility. Children mostly experience the results. Eventually the fires shrink. People move closer together. Blankets emerge. Coats remain buttoned longer than before. The temperature continues dropping. You feel it settling across the camp like an invisible blanket of its own. Except this blanket offers no warmth, only cold. The stars shine brilliantly overhead. The sky remains cloudless. Beautiful. Cold. The combination appears frequently throughout the journey. You notice families retreating toward wagons and bedding earlier than usual. The limited fire simply cannot provide endless comfort. Night belongs to the blankets now. The children disappear beneath quilts and covers. Parents tuck fabric carefully around shoulders and feet. Every bit of trapped warmth matters. A final log collapses into glowing embers. The light softens. Voices fade. Silence gradually returns. You lie awake briefly, listening to the wind moving across the prairie. The sound never completely stops. It whispers through the grass, brushes against canvas, slides across the open land. The children sleeping nearby have already learned something important. Surviving cold nights is not only about blankets, not only about wagons, not only about fire, it is also about preparation, about making careful use of limited resources, about finding warmth wherever warmth can be found. And tomorrow, as the journey continues westward, another source of unexpected comfort will reveal itself among the wagon train's most dependable companions. The animals themselves. Morning arrives beneath a pale sky. The camp slowly wakes. Blankets are folded. Breakfast fires struggle against the cool breeze. The prairie seems quieter than usual, as though autumn itself has settled over the landscape during the night. You stand near the wagon train and watch clouds of breath drift from both people and animals. The sight has become increasingly common. A few weeks ago, such chilly mornings would have felt unusual. Now they are becoming routine. The children notice it too. Many immediately begin the traditional and entirely irresistible activity of pretending to be steam locomotives. Small clouds puff into the air. Giggles follow. For a moment, the cold becomes entertainment. Children have a remarkable talent for transforming discomfort into play. Adults, meanwhile, focus on practical matters, because another source of warmth has become increasingly important. The animals. At first, this may sound strange. After all, oxen, mules, horses, and livestock are primarily transportation and labour. They pull wagons, carry supplies, provide essential assistance throughout the journey. Yet during cold weather they contribute something else. Presence, warmth, security. A broadly accepted historical reality is that oxen served as the primary draft animals for many Oregon Trail emigrants, because they were generally more durable and less expensive than horses. Without them, countless wagon trains would never have reached their destinations. You walk among the animals while the morning unfolds. Massive oxen stand patiently near their wagons. Their breath rises in white clouds. Their thick bodies radiate warmth. The sight is oddly reassuring. Children often develop strong attachments to these animals. That attachment makes sense. The oxen are constant companions. They appear every day, every mile, every campsite, every challenge. In a journey defined by uncertainty, familiarity becomes valuable. You notice a young boy scratching an ox gently behind its ear. The enormous animal appears completely unimpressed. The boy appears delighted. Friendships sometimes develop despite a significant difference in size. As the wagon train resumes its westward movement, the animals settle into their familiar rhythm. Hooves press into the earth. Harnesses creak. Wheels roll. The entire procession moves forward as one, hour after hour. Day after day, children walking nearby often learn the personalities of individual animals. One ox may be stubborn, another calm. A mule may possess opinions about absolutely everything. Many of those opinions appear negative. The trail offers ample opportunities to study animal behaviour. You continue travelling through the cool afternoon. The wind remains steady. Clouds drift overhead. The landscape seems increasingly touched by autumn. Evening eventually approaches. Once again the wagon train prepares to camp. The process feels familiar now, almost automatic. Yet tonight you notice something interesting. Families arrange their camps partly around the animals. Not only for convenience, for practical reasons. Animals provide a certain sense of security. Their presence feels comforting. The sounds they make become familiar parts of the night. A soft snort, the rustle of movement, the occasional clink of harness chains. These noises remind travellers they're not alone in the darkness. One fascinating detail preserved in various trail recollections describes children talking to oxen and mules as though they were trusted friends. Some youngsters shared worries, complaints, and stories with animals that could not possibly answer. Or perhaps the lack of answers was part of the appeal. Sometimes listeners are easier to appreciate when they remain silent. The campfire burns steadily. Supper cooks. The air grows colder. You feel the familiar transition beginning once more. Day surrendering to night. Warmth giving way to chill. Families gather close together. The animals remain nearby. Their large forms are visible in the fading light. Some children feel reassured simply knowing they are there. The prairie can seem enormous after dark. Anything familiar becomes valuable. As temperatures continue falling, another practical reality emerges. Large animals generate heat, a considerable amount of it. You certainly would not want to sleep directly beside an ox for comfort. The arrangement presents obvious drawbacks. Odor immediately comes to mind. Nevertheless, camps often benefited from the presence of so many living creatures. Warmth exists wherever life exists. The principle is simple. The effects are real. Some scholars continue discussing how much animal proximity influenced comfort levels in camp, since evidence varies among personal accounts. Yet many recollections emphasize the reassuring presence of livestock during difficult nights. The psychological benefit may have been just as important as any physical warmth. You sit near the fire and observe the camp settling into evening. Children yawn. Parents exchange quiet conversations. The stars begin appearing overhead. Everything feels peaceful. For the moment, a little girl points toward a mule standing nearby and insists that it looks thoughtful. The mule immediately attempts to chew part of a wagon harness. The evidence supporting deep philosophical reflection becomes less convincing. Still, the observation produces laughter. Even on difficult journeys, humour survives. Perhaps humour survives because difficult journeys require it. The night deepens. Families prepare bedding. The cold continues strengthening. You hear animals shifting occasionally in the darkness. The sounds have become familiar, comforting, even. The camp no longer feels like an isolated collection of people. It feels like a living community. Humans, animals, wagons, fires, all depending upon one another. The Oregon Trail constantly revealed how interconnected survival could be. No wagon moved without animals. No family travelled successfully without cooperation. No child endured alone. Everything connected. Everything mattered. An amusing anecdote from a former emigrant recalled a child who became convinced that one particular ox understood human speech perfectly. The animal supposedly received lengthy daily reports about trail events, weather conditions, and family concerns. Whether the ox appreciated these updates remains unknown. Its silence was probably wise. Eventually the fires burn lower. Children disappear beneath blankets. Parents make final checks. The animals settle for the night. The prairie grows quiet. You lie awake briefly, listening. The wind moves across the grass. A mule snorts somewhere nearby. An ox shifts its weight. The sounds create a strange kind of comfort. Not because they are beautiful, because they are familiar. And familiarity is precious on the frontier. Tomorrow the journey will continue. The weather will continue changing. New challenges will emerge. But tonight, as cold settles across the prairie once again, the wagon train rests together. Not just people, not just children. An entire travelling world of families and animals sharing the same long road westward beneath the stars. The sounds of the animals gradually fade into the background of daily life. After enough nights on the trail, children stop noticing every snort, shuffle, and harness rattle. The noises simply become part of the world. Like the wind, like wagon wheels, like the endless horizon itself. Yet as autumn deepens, another challenge begins quietly making its presence known. Not storms, not fuel shortages, not even the cold itself. Illness. The cold merely helps open the door. You wake one morning to find the camp unusually subdued. Nothing dramatic has happened. No disaster, no emergency, just a handful of tired faces. A few coughs. Several children moving more slowly than usual, the sort of symptoms modern people might dismiss without much thought. Out here, however, small problems demand attention. because small problems occasionally become large ones. The wagon train rolls onward beneath a grey sky. The weather feels damp. The breeze carries a chill that settles deep into clothing. You notice a young boy wrapped in an extra blanket while riding in the wagon rather than walking. His cheeks look flushed. His mother watches him carefully. Parents on the Oregon Trail became experts at observation. They had to. Medical assistance was often far away. One widely acknowledged historical reality is that illness represented one of the greatest dangers faced by emigrant families. Diseases ranging from common infections to more serious conditions affected thousands of travellers throughout the years of westward migration. The problem was not merely becoming sick. The problem was becoming sick while hundreds of miles from reliable medical care. You continue along the trail. The prairie stretches endlessly ahead. The scenery remains beautiful. Golden grass sways beneath the wind. Distant hills shimmer beneath sunlight. Nature carries on regardless of human concerns. That can feel comforting. It can also feel frustrating. A child with a sore throat does not care how picturesque the horizon appears. A parent with a feverish son or daughter notices beauty less easily. The practical realities of illness influence daily life. Extra rest may be needed. Additional attention. More careful monitoring. You watch one family stop briefly beside a stream. A mother wets a cloth and gently places it against her daughter's forehead. The gesture feels timeless. Parents have performed similar acts of care for countless generations. Technology changes. Compassion remains remarkably consistent. An unusual detail found in some emigrant recollections involves children's opinions about frontier remedies. Youngsters occasionally express strong objections to certain treatments, often with considerable dramatic flair. The medicines of the 19th century did not always possess appealing flavours. That is perhaps the most diplomatic way to describe the situation. The day progresses. The wagon train moves steadily forward, yet conversations increasingly include discussions of health. Who feels better? Who feels worse? Who needs rest? Who should avoid walking too far? These concerns become especially important as temperatures continue dropping. Cold weather places additional strain on tired bodies. A healthy child may tolerate a chilly night reasonably well. A sick child faces a greater challenge. The difference matters enormously. You notice adults paying close attention to evening preparations. Warm blankets become even more valuable. Hot meals become more important. A comfortable sleeping arrangement becomes a form of medicine. Not a cure, but assistance. Every advantage matters. Researchers have long examined how emigrant families balanced movement with recovery. Some accounts suggest that families occasionally face difficult choices between maintaining progress and allowing sufficient time for rest. Neither option was easy. The trail rewarded forward movement. The human body sometimes demanded otherwise. As sunset approaches, camp is established near a small stand of trees. The site feels almost luxurious after so much open prairie. Wood is available. That alone improves morale. Soon fires crackle throughout the camp. Warm meals begin cooking. The smell of smoke drifts through the cool evening air. You notice how many children gather near the flames tonight. Not because they are especially playful, because warmth feels good. Simple as that. A little girl with a lingering cough sits quietly beside her mother. Neither says much. The firelight flickers across their faces. The scene feels peaceful, yet beneath the calm lies concern. Every parent understands that feeling. The desire to protect, the inability to control everything. The Oregon Trail repeatedly reminded families of those limits. A memorable anecdote preserved in one emigrant account describes a child insisting that chicken soup possessed magical healing powers. Whether because of belief or actual nourishment, the youngster reportedly recommended it enthusiastically for nearly every ailment imaginable. In fairness, many adults might agree. Some remedies survive centuries because they occasionally work, or at least provide comfort. Comfort has value too. Darkness settles across the camp. The fires burn brightly. The wind feels colder tonight. You pull your coat tighter. Nearby families arrange bedding with extra care. Blankets are tucked securely. Children are encouraged to wear additional layers. Parents check sleeping areas repeatedly. Cold nights demand preparation. Cold nights combined with illness demand even more. You lie beneath the stars listening to the familiar sounds of camp. A cough echoes briefly through the darkness. Then another. Then silence. The noises are not alarming, just reminders. Human beings remain vulnerable no matter how determined they may be. The children crossing the Oregon Trail were resilient, exceptionally resilient, yet resilience did not make them invincible. The frontier never stopped testing them, sometimes through weather, sometimes through distance, sometimes through simple sickness. One academic discussion that continues among historians concerns how childhood illness shaped emigrant memories of the journey. Adults often recorded practical details. Children who later reflected on their experiences sometimes remembered emotions more vividly than specific events. Fear, relief, comfort, loneliness, warmth. The feelings often remained long after precise dates had faded. You understand why. Memory rarely behaves like a ledger. It behaves more like a campfire. Certain moments glow brightly, others disappear into shadow. The night grows deeper. The fires slowly shrink. Most children have fallen asleep. Parents finally allow themselves a little rest. Another day has passed. Another challenge has been met. The camp remains quiet beneath a sky filled with stars. Tomorrow may bring stronger winds, colder temperatures, perhaps better health, perhaps new difficulties. No one knows. The uncertainty remains constant. Yet tonight, surrounded by blankets, firelight, and the steady care of family, the children of the Oregon Trail continue doing what children have always done. They endure, they recover, they sleep, and they prepare, knowingly or not, for the harder night still waiting farther west. The morning after a cold night often feels surprisingly hopeful. Perhaps it is the sunlight. Perhaps it is simple relief. You survived another evening of chilly winds, cramped sleeping spaces, and restless weather. The camp awakens slowly. Smoke rises from breakfast fires. Children emerge from blankets looking slightly rumpled and thoroughly unimpressed by the temperature. A few coughs still linger among the wagon train, but spirits seem improved. The sun has a remarkable effect on morale. Even weak autumn sunlight feels encouraging after darkness. The wagons begin moving once more. The long road stretches westward. The miles continue accumulating, and as they do, you discover something important. Survival on the Oregon Trail is not only about food, shelter, and warmth. It is also about morale. People need reasons to smile, especially children, especially during cold weather. You walk beside the wagon train through another crisp day. The landscape rolls endlessly ahead. The wind carries the scent of dry grass and distant earth. Nothing dramatic happens, and that is precisely why the day feels valuable. Not every victory on the Oregon Trail involved escaping disaster. Sometimes the greatest gift was an ordinary day. A historical point frequently supported by emigrant diaries is that boredom was often as constant a companion as hardship. Long stretches of routine travel filled much of the journey between major landmarks and significant events. Children naturally responded to boredom with creativity. You notice them inventing games once again. One boy balances along a wagon rut as though crossing a dangerous canyon. A girl counts birds. Another child challenges friends to identify shapes in distant clouds. The prairie becomes a giant playground whenever imagination takes over. The adults encourage these distractions, not because the games serve practical purposes, because happy children are easier to manage than unhappy ones. That truth transcends centuries. As afternoon fades into evening, the familiar camp routines begin. The wagon train settles beside a small creek. Fires are lit. Meals are prepared. Animals are tended. The cold arrives as expected. It has become part of the rhythm now. Predictable, persistent. Tonight, however, something else emerges alongside the firelight. Stories. You notice children gathering near one of the larger campfires. Adults sit nearby. The flames dance in the growing darkness. The air smells of smoke and supper. The atmosphere feels almost cozy, almost A grandfather begins speaking. His voice is calm, measured, the sort of voice perfectly suited to storytelling. Soon the children are listening intently, so are several adults. Stories possess power. They always have. Out here, far from towns and familiar homes, that power becomes especially valuable. Stories transport people. For a little while, the prairie disappears. The cold disappears. The endless miles disappear. Only the tale remains. A charming detail found in several pioneer recollections describes children eagerly collecting ghost stories, adventure tales, and exaggerated frontier legends from older travellers. Accuracy was often considered optional. Entertainment was the primary objective, and entertainment succeeded. Laughter spreads around the fire. Eyes widen. Questions follow. Arguments occasionally emerge regarding whether a particular story could possibly be true. The answer rarely matters. You sit near the flames and listen. The fire crackles softly. Sparks rise into the darkness. The children seem warmer somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. The distinction matters. Cold weather challenges the body. Long journeys challenge the spirit. Storytelling helps address the second problem. Music serves a similar purpose. Eventually someone begins singing. The voice is not perfect. Perfection is unnecessary. Others join in. Some know the words. Some attempt to learn them. Children contribute enthusiastically, if not always accurately. The result feels wonderfully human. A little messy. A little imperfect. Entirely sincere. Researchers have explored the role of music and storytelling in maintaining morale among emigrant groups. Though measuring emotional benefits remains difficult, what appears repeatedly in personal accounts is the comfort these activities provided during difficult stretches of travel. Not everything valuable can be measured. You notice a young girl sitting quietly beside her mother. Earlier in the week she seemed homesick. Tonight she is smiling, listening, engaged. Perhaps the story is a reminder of evenings back home. Perhaps they simply offer a pleasant distraction. Either way, they help. The fire burns brighter as additional fuel is added. Faces glow orange and gold. The surrounding darkness seems less intimidating. A curious anecdote preserved in one emigrant memory tells of children creating ongoing fictional adventures that continued night after night throughout the journey. Characters developed elaborate histories, rivalries, and dramatic plot twists. Apparently serialized entertainment existed long before streaming services. The imagination has always been a reliable travel companion. The evening grows colder. You feel it in the air. You see it in the growing clouds of breath. Yet the mood remains warm. That contrast fascinates you. Outside the circle of firelight lies a vast and chilly prairie. Inside the circle lies laughter, conversation, music, human connection. The difference feels enormous. One scholarly question that still attracts discussion concerns how much childhood memories of the trail were shaped by hardship versus companionship. Later recollections often emphasize both, suggesting that even difficult experiences became more bearable when shared with others. Perhaps that is one of the oldest truths in human history. Challenges become lighter when carried together. The songs gradually fade. The stories come to an end. Children begin yawning. Parents exchange knowing glances. Bedtime approaches. A few youngsters attempt to negotiate additional stories. The negotiations fail, predictably. Blankets emerge. Bedding is arranged. The camp slowly transitions from lively gathering place to sleeping community. You notice something interesting as everyone settles down. The children seem calmer than on previous nights. More relaxed. More secure. The cold has not disappeared. The challenges remain. Nothing practical has changed. Yet morale has improved. Sometimes a story can accomplish that. Sometimes a song. Sometimes a shared laugh around a fire. The value may be difficult to calculate. Its importance is not. The stars shine overhead. The fire sinks toward glowing embers. One by one, families retreat into wagons and blankets. Silence gradually returns. Yet traces of the evening remain. A remembered joke, a favourite story, a melody still lingering in someone's thoughts. These small things travel west alongside the wagons, alongside the blankets, alongside the hopes and fears, and as another cold prairie night settles across the camp, they provide a kind of warmth that no quilt or campfire could ever fully replace. The songs fade, the stories settle into memory. The camp drifts into sleep beneath a sky crowded with stars. For a little while, the Oregon Trail feels almost gentle. Then morning arrives, and the mountains appear. Not close. Not yet. They rise far ahead along the horizon like shadows from another world. Blue, distant, enormous. You stare at them for a long moment. So do the children, for weeks, perhaps months. The prairie has dominated everything. The land stretched outward endlessly. Now something new has entered the story. Something solid. Something towering. Something impossible to ignore. The mountains. Their appearance excites travellers. It also worries them. Because mountains bring beauty. They also bring cold. The wagon train continues forward. The peaks remain distant throughout the morning. Then throughout the afternoon. Distance behaves strangely in the west. Things that seem nearby often remain far away. Yet each passing day brings them closer. The children talk about the mountains constantly. Some imagine snow. Some imagine hidden valleys. Some imagine bears behind every tree. Imagination rarely chooses moderation. A firmly established historical reality is that emigrants often faced enormous pressure to cross major mountain regions before severe winter weather arrived. Delays could place entire wagon trains at significant risk. The calendar mattered. Every day mattered. Every mile mattered. You notice adults studying the mountains with increasing seriousness. The conversations around campfires have changed. People still tell stories. People still laugh. Yet discussions of routes, timing, and weather occur more frequently. The mountains have a way of focusing attention. You spend the day walking beside the wagons. The landscape gradually begins changing. The prairie remains present, but subtle differences emerge. The air feels cooler. The wind carries a different scent. The horizon appears more complex. Rolling ground replaces some of the endless flatness. Children notice these changes too. A boy points excitedly toward a distant ridge. A girl collects unfamiliar stones during a brief stop. Everything feels new again. The journey has entered another chapter. As evening approaches, clouds gather around the distant peaks. The sight captures everyone's attention, even from far away. The mountains seem capable of creating their own weather. You can see streaks of white high on some slopes. Snow. Not much, just enough. The reminder is impossible to miss. Winter already lives up there. The wagon train still travels beneath autumn skies. The mountains are operating on a different schedule. One delightful detail preserved in several emigrant recollections involves children competing to identify mountain shapes. Peaks acquired nicknames based on castles, giants, animals, and every other possibility youthful imagination could invent. Mountains become more approachable when given silly names. At least in theory. The evening camp forms beside a stream. The water feels noticeably colder now. A child dips a hand into it and immediately withdraws with dramatic indignation. The reaction earns laughter. The stream remains completely unapologetic. Nearby fires begin glowing against the darkness. The familiar routines continue. Meals cook, animals rest. Children gather near warmth. Yet there is a growing sense that conditions are changing. The cold arrives earlier each evening. The mornings begin later. The stars seem sharper somehow, perhaps because the air itself feels different. You sit beside a fire and watch sparks drift upward. Above you, the mountains stand dark against the sky. Even at a distance, they dominate the landscape. The children stare at them often. So do the adults. The reasons differ. Children see adventure. Adults see obstacles. Both perspectives contain truth. A number of historians have debated how accurately emigrants understood the dangers posed by approaching mountain weather. Some wagon companies possessed experienced guides and substantial knowledge. Others relied on incomplete information and optimism. Optimism can carry people surprisingly far. It cannot melt snow. The fire crackles softly. Around it, conversations drift toward memories of home, toward destinations still waiting ahead, toward hopes, toward fears. The mountains influence every discussion. Nobody says it directly. Nobody needs to. Their presence speaks for itself. You notice a young girl sitting quietly beside her father. She asks whether the mountains are cold. The question receives a thoughtful pause, then a simple answer. Yes, very cold. Children appreciate honesty more than adults sometimes realize. The girl nods seriously, then asks whether there will still be stories around the fire. The father assures her there will be. That answer seemed equally important. Perhaps more important, a charming anecdote from one emigrant account describes a child who became convinced that mountains created clouds by breathing. Every morning's mist apparently served as evidence supporting the theory. Scientifically questionable, poetically excellent. Darkness deepens. The air grows colder than on previous nights. Not dramatically. Noticeably. You pull your blanket tighter. Others do the same. The season continues advancing. The mountains continue approaching. Neither process can be stopped. Researchers examining emigrant diaries frequently note how awareness of winter increased as travelers neared major mountain crossings. Entries often reveal growing concern about weather conditions and travel speed. The children rarely measured time that way. They measured it differently. How many stories until bedtime? How many rivers crossed? How many days until the next landmark? How many stars visible overhead? Different perspectives. Same journey. The fire burns lower. Families begin preparing for sleep. Blankets emerge. Children disappear into wagons and bedding. The camp gradually quiets. You remain awake briefly. The mountains are still visible beneath the moonlight. Dark silhouettes stretching across the horizon. Waiting. Patient. Unmoved by human schedules. Tomorrow the wagon train will move closer. The next day closer still. The coldest nights of the journey are no longer distant possibilities. They are becoming approaching realities. For now, however, the children sleep beneath quilts and stars, carrying dreams of mountains they have not yet reached. Mountains that promise beauty. Mountains that promise danger. Mountains that will soon test everything they have learned about surviving the cold. The mountains grow larger with every passing day. What once appeared as distant blue shapes now dominate entire horizons. Their peaks rise into clouds. Their slopes catch the early snow of the season, and the air around them feels colder, sharper, more serious. The children notice the difference immediately. Morning frost appears more frequently. Streams feel colder. The wind seems to carry winter itself down from the higher elevations. The wagon train presses onward. There is little choice. The mountains must be crossed. Waiting is rarely an option. Each day lost now feels more important than the one before. You walk beside the wagons beneath a grey sky. The weather has become increasingly unpredictable. Sunshine may last an hour. Clouds may arrive the next. The mountains seem to manufacture surprises. The prairie had been vast. The mountains feel powerful. There is a distinction. A commonly recognized fact from trail history is that mountain crossings represented some of the most difficult portions of the Oregon Trail, requiring careful navigation through steep terrain, unpredictable weather, and limited routes. The challenges multiply quickly. Roads become rougher. Progress slows. Animals work harder. Families become more cautious. Children feel the change too, even if they cannot explain it. The atmosphere itself has shifted. You notice a group of youngsters standing beside a stream. Snowflakes drift briefly through the air. Only a few. They melt almost immediately, yet the reaction is unforgettable. Excitement erupts instantly. Voices rise, hands reach skyward. For a moment, the approaching winter feels magical rather than threatening. That is one advantage children possess. Wonder often arrives before worry. The adults are less enthusiastic. Snowflakes mean something very different to them. The snow vanishes quickly. The message remains. The season is advancing. The wagon train continues climbing gradually into higher country. Trees appear more frequently now. Rocky slopes replace endless grasslands. The scenery becomes dramatic, beautiful, and increasingly cold. You feel it especially after sunset. The temperature drops faster here. The warmth of daylight disappears with surprising speed. One fascinating detail preserved in emigrant accounts describes children trying to catch individual snowflakes on mittens, sleeves, and hat brims during the season's first flurries. Many treated the event as a celebration. The mountains had delivered something new. Children generally appreciate novelty. The novelty becomes less appealing after several hours of freezing weather. Experience eventually teaches that lesson. The camp forms near a stand of pine trees. The scent fills the evening air. It feels different from the open prairie camps of earlier weeks. More enclosed, more sheltered, yet not necessarily safer. The mountains create their own challenges. The fires burn brightly. Wood is easier to obtain here than on the plains. That improvement boosts morale immediately. Larger fires mean greater warmth. Greater warmth means happier travelers. The relationship requires little explanation. Children gather near the flames. Parents discuss weather. Everyone occasionally glances toward the surrounding peaks. Clouds cling to higher elevations. Snow remains visible in the distance. The mountains seem to be watching, not hostile, not friendly, simply present. You sit beside the fire and listen to the wind moving through pine branches overhead. The sound differs from prairie winds. Softer, more complex. The trees catch and shape the air. For a moment it almost sounds like whispers. A memorable story recorded by one traveller describes children becoming convinced that mountain forests were inhabited by invisible singers because of the strange sounds produced by wind moving through tall trees. You cannot entirely blame them. The noise does feel mysterious after months on open grasslands. Night falls completely. The stars emerge between drifting clouds. The temperature drops sharply. Much more sharply than before. Children retreat into blankets earlier than usual. Even adults linger close to the fire. The cold now feels serious. Not dangerous yet. Serious. That distinction matters. You pull your coat tighter and watch sparks rise into the darkness. The camp remains peaceful, yet a sense of tension exists beneath the surface. Everyone understands that worse weather could arrive at any time. Some researchers continue examining how emigrant groups responded to early mountain storms. Accounts vary considerably, reflecting differences in leadership, preparation, timing, and simple luck. Luck appears more frequently in frontier history than people sometimes admit. Preparation matters. Skill matters. Fortune occasionally matters too. The wind strengthens during the evening, not dramatically, steadily. The trees sway overhead. The fire flickers. Children glance toward the darkness. Parents offer reassurance. The camp continues its routines. Meals, stories, blankets, sleep. Routine remains one of the best defenses against anxiety. The familiar actions remind everyone that life continues, even when conditions become challenging. A young boy asks whether the mountains ever become tired of snow. The question receives several thoughtful answers and one completely invented explanation involving mountain giants. The invented version proves far more popular. Historical accuracy rarely defeats a good story. The night grows colder still. You can feel the temperature falling almost hour by hour. Water left exposed develops a thin layer of ice. Breath hangs visibly in the air. Blankets suddenly seem less like bedding and more like essential equipment. Children curl tightly beneath quilts. Parents make careful adjustments. Every layer matters. Every source of warmth matters. Every precaution matters. You lie awake briefly after most of the camp has fallen asleep. The wind continues moving through the trees. Clouds drift across the stars. The mountains loom around you. Dark, silent, immense. And then it happens. A few snowflakes begin drifting from the sky. Slowly, quietly, almost lazily. They settle upon wagon covers, upon blankets left outside, upon pine branches. No storm follows. Not tonight. Just a brief snowfall. A reminder. A preview. The mountains are revealing what lies ahead. You watch the flakes disappear into the darkness. The children sleep through most of it. Perhaps that is for the best. Tomorrow they will wake to traces of snow and excitement. The adults will wake to something slightly different. A renewed awareness of the calendar, a renewed awareness of winter, and a renewed determination to keep moving before the mountains decide to unleash something far more powerful than a handful of drifting flakes. The snowflakes vanish by morning. Most have melted. A few linger in sheltered places beneath trees and along shaded rocks. Children discover them immediately. Tiny patches become objects of fascination. Small snowballs are attempted. Several fail spectacularly. The snow is too thin. The enthusiasm is not. For a little while, the mountain morning feels cheerful, fresh, interesting. Then the wind changes. You notice it first as a faint sound moving through the trees. A distant rushing noise, low, persistent, a sort of sound that makes people glance toward the sky without entirely knowing why. Adults pause during breakfast. They study the clouds. The mountains have disappeared behind a grey curtain. That is not encouraging. The wagon train prepares to move. But conversations are different today, quieter, more focused. The air itself feels tense, not frightened, alert. The distinction matters. Experience has taught these travellers to respect weather. The journey continues. Wagons roll forward along narrow mountain routes. The landscape rises and falls around you. Pine forests stretch across hillsides. Rocky slopes climb toward hidden summits. The world feels smaller than the prairie, more enclosed, more complicated. By midday, the wind has strengthened considerably. Branches sway overhead. Loose snow swirls through the air. The sky grows darker. Children pull coats tighter. Parents exchange worried glances. Something is coming. A frequently documented reality of Western migration is that sudden mountain storms could transform travel conditions with alarming speed, particularly during late-season crossings. The mountains rarely provide lengthy warnings. The first true gust arrives with surprising force. It pushes against wagon covers. It sends dry leaves tumbling across the trail. It steals warmth instantly. You feel the cold deepen, not gradually, immediately. The change is startling. Children notice it too. Games disappear. Conversations become shorter. Everyone focuses on movement, on staying warm, on keeping up. The wagon train presses forward. For a while, then the snow begins. At first it seems harmless. A few flakes. Then more, then many more. Within an hour, the landscape changes. Trees acquire white outlines. The ground begins disappearing beneath a fresh layer of snow. Visibility decreases. The storm is arriving. Not tomorrow, not later, now. You watch families react. There is no panic. Panic rarely helps. Instead, there is urgency, determination. People move with purpose. Animals are guided carefully. Children are kept close. The priorities become very simple. Stay together. Keep moving if possible. Stay warm. One remarkable recollection from a pioneer diary described children trying to catch storm snowflakes on their tongues during the early moments of a blizzard. The adults reportedly appreciated their enthusiasm far less than the children did. Perspective changes dramatically with age. For a child, snow may seem exciting. For a parent, it may represent danger. The storm intensifies. Wind drives snow sideways. The landscape becomes increasingly difficult to see. Familiar landmarks vanish. Distant hills disappear entirely. The world shrinks to whatever exists a short distance ahead. You can understand why storms inspired such respect. The mountains already create challenges, add snow and wind, and every difficulty multiplies. The wagon train finally stops. Continuing would be too risky. Camp must be established despite the weather. This is easier said than done. The wind fights every effort. Snow accumulates rapidly. Hands grow numb. Faces sting from exposure. Children huddle beneath blankets and coats. Parents work quickly, very quickly. Shelter becomes the immediate goal. Researchers continue examining how different wagon companies responded to severe weather events, and accounts reveal a wide variety of strategies. leadership, preparation, terrain, and luck all influenced outcomes. Luck again, that quiet companion of frontier history. You help secure a wagon cover against the wind. The canvas snaps violently. Snow swirls around you. The air smells sharp and cold. Every exposed surface seems to radiate winter. Finally, shelter's established. Not perfect shelter. Enough shelter. Enough becomes a very important word during storms. Children are gathered together. Blankets are layered. Additional clothing appears. Everyone focuses on preserving warmth. The storm howls outside. Inside the wagon, conditions remain cramped and uncomfortable. Yet compared with the world beyond the canvas, it feels remarkably safe. A young boy asks whether the storm will last forever. The question receives gentle reassurance. No, it will not last forever. Few storms do. The answer helps. Children often need confidence more than detailed meteorological explanations. The afternoon fades into evening. Darkness arrives early beneath thick clouds. The storm continues. Wind rattles the wagon relentlessly. Snow accumulates against wheels and canvas. The cold feels more intense than anything experienced earlier in the journey. This is no longer a chilly prairie evening. This is genuine mountain weather. An amusing memory preserved decades later by one former emigrant child involved attempting to estimate the storm's strength by counting wagon creaks. The method was not scientifically rigorous, but it successfully occupied several anxious hours. Sometimes distraction is its own form of comfort. Night settles fully. The storm remains. The children lie beneath blankets. Some sleep, some do not. The sounds outside make sleep difficult. Wind roars through trees. Snow brushes against canvas. Occasionally a stronger gust shakes the entire wagon. You listen to it all. The coldest night so far has arrived. And it feels endless. Parents remain awake longer than usual. They check blankets, adjust clothing, offer reassurance. The work of keeping children warm never truly stops during weather like this. Hours pass. The storm refuses to leave. Yet gradually something remarkable happens. The fear begins to lessen. Not because conditions improve, because human beings adapt. Children who seemed frightened earlier grow quieter. Families settle into routines even within the storm. Blankets, stories, whispered conversations, small acts of care. The same tools that helped on the prairie continue helping here. Outside, winter rages. Inside, families endure. That may be one of the most important lessons of the Oregon Trail. Survival rarely depended upon dramatic heroics. More often it depended upon persistence, patience, preparation, and the determination to face one difficult hour after another. The storm continues beyond midnight. Snow falls. Wind blows. The mountains remind everyone who truly controls the landscape. Yet when dawn eventually arrives, the children inside these wagons will discover something important. They survived the night, and sometimes, during a frontier winter storm, that achievement alone is enough. Morning arrives slowly after the storm, not with sunlight at first, but with a grey, exhausted brightness that spreads unevenly across the mountains. The wind has not completely stopped. It has simply lost some of its anger. Snow still clings to every surface. Wagons, trees, blankets left outside during the night. Everything wears the same pale coating. You step carefully through the camp. The snow crunches softly beneath your boots. Children begin emerging one by one from wagons and makeshift shelters. Their faces look tired, but curious. There is something almost magical about the aftermath of a storm. The world feels transformed. The same landscape now appears unfamiliar, brighter in an odd way, quieter. The storm has erased the noise of movement. What remains is stillness. A widely accepted historical reality is that mountain snowstorms often disrupted travel schedules significantly, forcing emigrant groups to pause for recovery, clearing paths, or waiting for safer conditions before continuing. Today is one of those days. No wagons move forward. Not yet. The priority is survival and assessment. You walk through camp while adults evaluate damage. Some wagons require clearing. Animals need attention. Frozen equipment must be checked. Small repairs begin immediately. The cold remains intense, yet manageable, because the storm itself has passed. Children are the first to truly notice the change. They step into fresh snow with cautious excitement. Some laugh softly. Some fall immediately into deeper drifts and struggle back up again. Even exhaustion cannot fully suppress curiosity. One boy attempts to follow animal tracks that disappeared during the night. Another throws a small snowball that barely holds together. The effort still earns laughter. Adults allow these moments, briefly, because morale matters almost as much as supplies. You notice how the mountains look after the storm. Different, stripped of distance, closer, more detailed. Every ridge stands out sharply against the sky. Snow highlights every contour. The world feels carved rather than simply formed. A curious detail preserved in several emigrant accounts describes how children often believed storms redrew the mountains overnight, as if the landscape itself had been reshaped while they slept. In a sense, that feeling was not entirely wrong. The environment here changes constantly. The wagon train slowly begins the work of recovery. Canvas coverings are shaken free of snow. Firewood is gathered where possible. Fires are restarted with care. Damp fuel makes everything more difficult. Smoke rises unevenly, drifts sideways in the lingering wind. You help where you can. Hands grow cold quickly, but movement helps. The body responds to effort even in harsh conditions. As midday approaches, a faint sense of order returns. Not comfort, order. Families begin talking again. Children are fed warm food where possible. The worst of the night is now behind everyone. Yet the mountains are not finished. They never are. Travel resumes cautiously. Wagons move slowly along partially buried trails. Snow compresses under wheels. Animals struggle slightly but continue forward. Every mile now requires more effort than before the storm. You notice how silence dominates the journey. Even children speak less. Not from fear, from concentration. The terrain demands attention. A single misstep can slow everything. Or worse, the mountain paths narrow in places. Trees crowd closer. Cliffs appear where the prairie offered none. The sense of exposure changes form. On the plains, exposure meant openness. Here it means confinement and elevation combined. By late afternoon, the wagon train reaches a more sheltered valley. The snow is slightly less deep here. Trees provide partial cover. Wind is weaker. The decision is made to camp early. No one objects. Setting camp becomes familiar again, but the atmosphere remains different from prairie nights. More cautious, more alert. You stand near a fire as it slowly regains strength. Steam rises from wet clothing. Children gather close for warmth. Their earlier energy has softened into quiet fatigue. Yet there is also relief. The storm didn't break the group. That realization settles in gradually. A historian examining emigrant narratives would likely describe this as a recurring pattern, where groups experience cycles of crisis followed by stabilization, each event reinforcing collective resilience. In simpler terms, people adapted. The fire burns brighter as evening approaches. Food is distributed carefully, nothing wasted. Supplies feel more precious after storms. You listen to conversations around camp. They are different now, less speculative, more grounded. People discuss routes ahead, weather patterns, timing. Everything has become more serious. Even the children seem to understand something has shifted. The mountains are no longer a distant curiosity. They are an active challenge. Night arrives again, quieter than before. No storm tonight, just lingering cold. The sky clears slowly, revealing stars that seem sharper than ever. The air feels thinner at this elevation, or perhaps just colder. You settle beside the fire and watch sparks rise upward. They vanish quickly into the dark sky. There is something calming about this moment. After chaos, stillness feels almost luxurious. Children sleep earlier tonight. Exhaustion plays its role. So does comfort from surviving the storm. Parents remain awake a little longer, checking wagons, checking animals, checking each other. Trust is built in moments like this, not spoken, performed. Eventually even the adults rest. The camp quiets. The mountain stands silent around you. Snow reflects faint starlight across the valley. The storm is gone, but its presence remains in every surface, every sound, every breath of cold air. You understand now that survival here is not a single event. It is repetition, endurance, adjustment, and the willingness to continue forward even after the land itself has tried to stop you. Somewhere deeper in the mountains, winter is still waiting, but for tonight, the wagon train rests. And that, for now, is enough. Morning returns with a different kind of silence. Not the silence of a storm, not the silence of fear, but the silence of exhaustion settling into the landscape. The wagon train awakens slowly once more. Snow still blankets the valley, but the sky is clearer now. A pale winter sun hangs low above the mountains, offering light without much warmth. Everything feels crisp, clean, fragile. You step outside and immediately feel how the storm has reshaped the environment again. Footprints from yesterday are already softened. Wagon tracks are partially filled. Nature is quietly reclaiming every impression left behind. Children notice this first. They always do. One girl crouches to examine a melted ridge of snow shaped by wagon wheels. She traces it with her finger as if reading a story written overnight. A mainstream historical fact often recorded in emigrant accounts is that winter conditions in mountainous regions frequently forced wagon trains to delay travel, sometimes for days, until trails could be cleared or deemed safe enough for passage. Today is still part of that waiting. But waiting does not mean inactivity. The camp becomes a place of repair and preparation. Wagons are checked carefully for damage caused by the storm. Canvas is tightened. Wooden joints are inspected. Animal hooves are examined for ice and injury. Every detail matters more after harsh weather. You help clear snow from around a wagon wheel. It is heavier than it looks. Cold snow becomes dense, almost compacted like wet sand. Each movement requires effort. But there is a quiet satisfaction in restoring order. Children are assigned lighter tasks. Some gather small pieces of firewood. Others help shake blankets dry near the fire. A few simply play again in the snow, though more cautiously than before. Experience has left its mark. The mountains stand watch in every direction. Now they appear even closer than before. Snow highlights their shape in sharp contrast. You notice how the peaks seem almost layered, one behind another, like enormous walls guarding the route ahead. The emotional weight of that view is difficult to describe. It is not fear exactly. It is awareness, a recognition that the journey has entered its most demanding stage. A curious tidbit preserved in several pioneer diaries mentions children collecting icicles from wagon edges and pretending they were glass swords or magical tools. Even in freezing conditions, imagination found ways to continue. The day progresses slowly. No wagons move yet. The trail ahead must be evaluated. A few men ride forward to scout the path through the valley. Their figures disappear into the pale distance between trees and snowbanks. Waiting resumes. Waiting has become a familiar companion on this journey. Children use the time differently than the adults. Some continue playing in small bursts. Others sit near the fire watching steam rise from wet clothing. A few simply rest. The storm drained more energy than anyone admitted at first. By midday, the scouts return. Their news is not dramatic, but it is important. The path is passable. Difficult. Narrow. But passable? That single word changes everything. Camp stirs into motion. Not hurriedly. Carefully. The wagon train prepares to move forward once more. Animals are harnessed, supplies are secured, children are gathered. The familiar rhythm returns. Slow wheels begin turning through snow softened by partial melt and foot traffic. The mountains accept this movement without reaction. They remain unchanged. Immovable. You walk along the edge of the wagon line as it begins climbing again. The train rises gradually. Each step feels slightly more demanding. Breathing becomes more noticeable. The air is thinner. Or colder, or both. Perhaps it is impossible to separate the two entirely at this elevation. As the afternoon continues, the valley begins narrowing. Trees grow thicker, cliffs rise higher, The trail becomes more defined and less forgiving. This is no longer open travel. It is passage through a corridor carved by nature itself. One scholar examining migration patterns once noted that mountain crossings transformed wagon trains from loosely organized groups into tightly coordinated units, where spacing, timing, and cooperation became essential for survival. You can feel that transformation happening now. Wagons follow each other more carefully. Distances shrink. Communication increases. Signals matter. A raised hand, a shouted warning, a sudden stop. Every action influences the group. Children remain close to their families. There is less wandering now. More awareness, not fear. Awareness. Evening approaches earlier in these valleys. The sun disappears behind peaks sooner than expected. Shadows grow quickly. The temperature drops almost immediately after light fades. Camp is established once again beside a rocky clearing. Firewood is more plentiful here, which brings relief. Fires burn steadily. Warmth spreads across the camp. You sit near one and watch sparks drift upward against the cold air. The mountains feel different at night. Larger, closer, almost enclosing the valley. A quiet anecdote from emigrant memory describes children believing that mountain echoes were the voices of the land itself, repeating traveller conversations after dark. Whether true or not, the idea captures the eerie acoustics of enclosed valleys. Tonight, sounds do seem different. Every noise carries further. Every crack of wood feels amplified. Children whisper instead of speaking loudly. The atmosphere encourages quiet, yet not discomfort, something closer to reverence. As darkness settles fully, the wagon train rests in a deeper part of the mountains. Snow glows faintly under starlight. The air is still, cold but stable. The storm has passed. The trail continues, and for the first time since entering the mountains, there is a sense that forward movement is not only possible, but inevitable. Not easy, not fast, but possible. You pull your blanket tighter and listen to the quiet sounds of camp settling into sleep. The mountains surround you on every side, yet instead of feeling trapped, you feel something slightly different. You feel as though you are inside the journey itself now, not passing through it, living within it, and somewhere ahead, beyond the next ridge and the next valley, the path continues waiting in silence. The mountains feel different after the storm has passed. Not gentler, not kinder, simply more present, as if the landscape has stepped closer while everyone was asleep. Morning arrives with a pale light that struggles to warm anything it touches. Frost clings stubbornly to grass, wagon wood, and even the edges of canvas covers. The wagon train prepares again, but there is no illusion of ease now. Every traveller understands they're deep inside the mountain passage, not approaching it, not preparing for it, inside it. You notice how conversation has changed over time. Earlier in the journey, people spoke about destinations, about Oregon, about new farms and promised futures. Now conversations are more immediate. Is the trail safe today? How far to the next pass? Whether the weather will hold? A widely recognized historical fact is that emigrant groups crossing mountain ranges often relied heavily on shared decision-making and informal leadership structures, especially when formal guidance was limited or unavailable. Out here, authority is often practical rather than official. Experience matters more than titles. You walk beside the wagons as they move forward into a narrowing path between ridges. The air feels sharper again. Each breath is noticeable. Children remain quieter than before. Not unhappy, just attentive. The mountains demand attention. A curious detail recorded in some pioneer recollections describes children attempting to race the sun by guessing whether they could reach the next landmark before shadows stretched too far across the trail. It became a quiet game of timing and observation. Today, the landscape makes such games feel different, less playful, more uncertain. The trail climbs gradually. Wagons strain slightly as wheels roll over uneven ground. Rocks replace soft earth in places. Loose gravel shifts under pressure. Progress slows without stopping. You can hear the steady rhythm of effort. Wood creaking, harnesses tightening, animals breathing, human footsteps crunching snow and stone. The forest grows thicker again in some areas. Pine branches hang low with residual frost. Occasionally a gust shakes loose a small shower of snow from the trees. It falls softly at first, then disappears. The children react each time as if it is a small event, because in a landscape this large and demanding, small events matter. By midday, the wagon train reaches a wider clearing. Here the mountains open briefly, revealing a distant view of even higher peaks. The sight is both beautiful and intimidating. Snow covers the upper slopes in heavy layers now. Winter is no longer approaching. It is established. A well-documented reality of Western migration is that families who delayed mountain crossings into deeper winter months often face significantly increased risk due to snow accumulation, reduced visibility, and more frequent storms. The calendar is no longer just a guide. It is a pressure. You watch adults studying the horizon again. There is calculation in their expressions. Not fear, not hesitation, just assessment. Decisions are being made constantly now, even when no one speaks them aloud. The wagon train continues forward after a brief rest. The train grows more rugged. Trees thin out in some places, replaced by exposed rock and open slopes. The world feels more vertical than horizontal. Children must be watched more closely now, not because they are misbehaving, because the environment itself has become less forgiving. A single misstep near a steep edge could matter. This awareness subtly changes how families move. Closer spacing between wagons, more frequent checks, shorter distances between rest points. The group becomes more synchronized without formal instruction. That is how survival often works here. Gradually, quietly, through shared understanding. As evening approaches, the wagon train descends slightly into another sheltered basin. The location feels safer than previous camps. Surrounded by ridges, partially protected from wind, firewood available nearby, small comforts still exist in the mountains. They are simply harder to notice. Camp forms with practiced efficiency. Fires are lit quickly, food is prepared, animals are tended. The cold arrives soon after sunset, but it does not feel as sudden as before, perhaps because expectations have changed, or perhaps because bodies have adapted. You sit near the fire and feel the warmth on your face. The contrast with the air around you is sharp, a reminder of how thin the boundary is between comfort and hardship. Children gather close, their faces glowing in the firelight. A few still play, but more quietly now. Their energy has shifted, less explosive, more thoughtful. A small anecdote from emigrant memory tells of children using mountain shadows to invent giant stories, where every cliff and ridge became a character in an ongoing imaginary world. The mountains encourage storytelling, even without intention. Night settles fully. The camp grows quiet. The stars appear again between passing clouds. The mountains rise dark and massive on all sides. Yet there is something different in the silence tonight. Less tension, more acceptance. The wagon train has begun to adapt to this environment in a deeper way. Not just physically, mentally. You lie beneath blankets and listen to the wind moving across higher slopes. It carries a colder edge now, but also a steady rhythm, predictable in its unpredictability, if that makes sense. The children sleep more easily tonight, not because conditions are easier, because familiarity is growing. Even hardship becomes familiar when repeated enough times, and familiarity, even in a place like this, brings a strange kind of comfort. Somewhere beyond the valley, the next pass waits, and beyond that, more weather, more cold, more miles. But for this night, in this sheltered basin among the mountains, the wagon train rests with a quiet understanding. They are not finished. They are not safe, but they are moving forward, and that movement itself has become its own form of endurance. The next morning arrives without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise, no sudden change in fortune, just a gradual brightening of the sky above the mountain basin. The air is cold enough that breath still appears clearly, but the wind is gentler here. The wagon train begins moving again, this time with a clearer sense of direction. The path ahead leads toward higher passes, narrow crossings where mountains decide how easily travelers may proceed. You notice how everyone seems more deliberate now. Movements are slower but more precise. Words are fewer but more meaningful. The journey has entered a phase where mistakes carry greater weight. A widely accepted historical fact is that mountain passes along major migration routes often dictated the success or failure of entire wagon companies, as weather, elevation, and timing combined to create highly variable conditions from year to year. Today, the pass looms ahead, a distant gap between peaks, barely visible at first, then slowly more defined as the wagons approach. Children point toward it. They do not fully understand what it represents, but they sense importance. The climb begins gradually. Wheels creak under increased strain. Animals lean forward into harnesses. The sound of effort becomes constant again. You walk beside the wagons and feel the altitude increasing with each step. Breathing requires slightly more awareness. The air feels thinner, colder, more precise somehow, as if every breath must be earned. The landscape becomes increasingly stark. Trees thin out again. Rock dominates the terrain. Snow appears in deeper patches, no longer melting quickly under weak sunlight. A curious detail preserved in emigrant recollections describes children becoming fascinated with altitude changes, sometimes claiming they could feel the air getting lighter, even without understanding the science behind it. Their descriptions were often surprisingly accurate in sensation, if not in explanation. By midday, the wagon train reaches the base of the pass. Here the mountains rise sharply on both sides. The path narrows, wagons slow significantly. This is where the journey becomes most demanding. Not because of distance, because of difficulty. The ascent is gradual but relentless. Every wagon requires careful coordination. Every animal must be guided with patience. Every movement must be considered. You notice how silence increases during the climb. Not complete silence, but reduced conversation, more focus, more concentration. Even children sense the importance of quiet. The mountains seem to absorb sound, or perhaps everyone is simply conserving energy. Halfway through the ascent, a brief pause is called. The wagon train stops on a narrow ledge overlooking a steep drop. The view is vast. Below, a valley stretches into distance. Above, peaks rise into clouds. The world feels layered, fragile, immense. Parents gather children close during the stop, not out of fear, out of habit, out of awareness. A well-documented reality of emigrant mountain crossings is that steep passes required frequent pauses for rest, inspection of wagons, and adjustment of loads to prevent accidents on difficult terrain. Here, every detail matters more. You watch as a wheel is checked carefully, a harness tightened, a load redistributed, small corrections that prevent large problems. The climb resumes, slowly, carefully. The pass draws nearer. Snow becomes more consistent now, not scattered patches, continuous coverage in shaded areas. The temperature drops further. Children pull coats tighter without being asked. The air itself feels sharper. By late afternoon, the wagon train reaches the summit of the pass. The moment is quiet, no celebration, no dramatic announcement, just arrival, a ridge of land between worlds. On one side, the route travelled, on the other, the route ahead. The view from the top is both beautiful and humbling. Mountains extend endlessly in every direction, layers upon layers of peaks, snow glowing faintly under winter light. You understand why this moment mattered so much to travellers, not because it ends difficulty, but because it confirms survival, at least for now. A subtle anecdote from pioneer memory describes children reacting to mountain summits with unexpected calm, often more interested in finding flat places to sit than in admiring views that adults considered breathtaking. Perspective differs with age. The descent begins after a short rest. Going down proves just as demanding as climbing up. Wagons require control. Brakes must be carefully applied. Animals guided with precision. Every movement controlled to prevent accidents. The wagon train moves like a single cautious organism, step by step, carefully forward. The mountains now feel less like barriers and more like passages, still dangerous, still demanding, but navigable. Evening arrives before the descent is fully complete. Camp is established on a gentler slope, less steep, more stable. Fires are lit quickly. The The warmth feels especially welcome after the long climb. Children settle near the flames with visible relief. Exhaustion sits in their posture, not defeat. Completion. You sit beside the fire and watch sparks drift into the cold air. Above you, the pass looms silently in the fading light. The hardest part of the mountains has been crossed. Not all of it, but enough to change the journey. A number of historians have noted that successful passage through major mountain ranges often marked a psychological turning point for emigrant groups, reinforcing confidence and cohesion even while challenges still remained ahead. You can feel that shift here, subtle but real. The children sleep more quickly tonight. The adults speak less. The camp settles into rest with unusual steadiness. Outside the circle of firelight, the mountains remain cold and immense. Inside it, there is warmth. And for the first time in many nights, that warmth feels slightly more secure. Not permanent, but real. The wagon train has crossed something important. And ahead, beyond the slopes and shadows, the journey continues into land that is slowly beginning to feel less like wilderness and more like distance that can be travelled. Morning on the far side of the pass feels different, not because the mountains have disappeared. They have not, but because something in the air has changed. The descent has brought you into a wider valley, where the landscape opens again and the horizon stretches farther than it has in days. Snow still covers the higher slopes behind you, yet down here the cold feels less sharp, less immediate, almost patient. The wagon train begins moving once more, carefully at first, then with growing confidence. The path ahead is still mountain country, but it no longer feels like a trap. It feels like a route. You notice the children reacting before the adults fully speak. There is more talking now, more pointing, more movement away from the tight silence of the pass. The psychological pressure eases in small increments. A widely recognized historical fact is that once emigrant groups successfully crossed major mountain barriers, travel narratives often shifted in tone, reflecting increased optimism and renewed focus on reaching final destinations such as Oregon and California settlements. That shift is already beginning here, not loudly, but steadily. You walk beside the wagons as they descend through forested slopes. Pine trees return in greater numbers. Streams run more freely again. The sound of water replaces the heavier silence of snowbound rock. Children notice the difference immediately. One boy kneels beside a stream and watches it move without hesitation, as if he's seeing motion itself as something newly fascinating. Another collects smooth stones again, restarting a habit that had nearly disappeared in the deep snow. Small joys return when pressure loosens. That is a pattern repeated throughout the journey. The wagon train moves deeper into lower elevations. Snow becomes intermittent. Patches remain in shaded places, but they no longer dominate the ground. Mud begins to appear instead, less visually striking, more practical, and just as demanding in its own way. Wheels sink slightly. Animals adjust their footing. Progress continues, but unevenly. You can sense how the environment is constantly negotiating with a movement, allowing it, resisting it, then allowing it again. Normal is a powerful concept when everything has been uncertain. By midday, the wagon train reaches a broader valley floor. The land opens dramatically. Rivers appear larger. Grass returns in greener patches. The sense of confinement fades. You notice adults relaxing slightly for the first time since entering the mountains. Shoulders drop. Conversations lengthen. Even the pace of walking feels less tense. Yet caution remains. The mountains are still nearby. They always are, just no longer enclosing every direction at once. A number of historians continue to examine how emigrant morale fluctuated after major geographic transitions, noting that emotional recovery often lagged behind physical progress by several days or even weeks. In simple terms, relief takes time to settle. Even after danger passes, water becomes a constant companion again. Children walk closer to its edge, occasionally skipping stones or simply watching the current. The sound of flowing water replaces the sharper sounds of wind and snow. Even the animals seem calmer. You notice oxen moving with steadier rhythm. Less strain, more consistency. The world feels less hostile, As evening approaches, the decision is made to camp in a sheltered grove near the river. The location feels almost peaceful compared to recent nights. Fires are lit without urgency. Meals are prepared with less tension. The difference is noticeable in every movement. Children laugh more freely again. Not loudly, but naturally. The cold is still present, but it no longer dominates attention. You sit near a fire and feel a sense of reflection settling in. The mountains are behind you now. Not completely, but enough to change perspective. What once felt like an endless barrier now feels like a chapter that has been crossed. A well-documented reality of westward migration is that successful passage through mountain ranges often marked a transition in both physical and emotional travel conditions. As groups moved from high-difficulty terrain into comparatively gentler river valleys and plains approaches, that transition is exactly what you feel now. The fire crackles gently. Stars appear overhead once again, but the sky feels less oppressive than in the deep mountain basins. More open, more familiar. Children settle early tonight. Their exhaustion is different from before, less strained, more ordinary. Parents remain seated a little longer, talking quietly. Perhaps for the first time in many nights, conversations are not dominated by weather or survival. Instead, they drift toward destination, toward what comes next, toward imagining life after the trail. A quiet anecdote from emigrant memory describes children asking not about the journey anymore, but about what their new homes would look like, signaling a subtle but important shift in mindset from survival to anticipation. That shift matters, because it means endurance has carried them far enough to begin thinking beyond the immediate struggle. The fire slowly settles into embers. The river continues flowing nearby, steady and unbothered. The wagon train rests in a valley that feels safer than what came before, though still far from final arrival. You lie beneath a blanket and listen to the softer sounds of night. Water, wind, occasional movement from animals. Everything feels calmer now. Not easy, but calmer. And as sleep approaches, there's a quiet understanding settling across the camp. The coldest nights have been endured. The hardest mountain passages have been crossed. What remains is still a long journey, but it is no longer the same journey that began on the plains so many nights ago. It has changed, and so have the children who travelled through it. Now, as the wagon train sleeps beside the river under a widening sky, the Oregon Trail continues forward, carrying not only families and wagons, but the memory of every storm, every frozen night, and every mountain crossed along the way. Sweet dreams,